Very little is known about the childhood and youth of Arcadio Alvarez. We know that at some point during his youth, he formed a relationship with a woman whose identity has not been disclosed and with whom he had a daughter. It appears that his partner died in 1979, and he was left to care for the little girl, who was then 5 years old. The girl's name was Alba Nidia Alvarez, who later became known as Nidia. After the death of his life partner, Arcadio moved into the home of a relative, an aunt of Nidia's, though it was unclear whether she was his sister or the sister of his deceased wife. However, a few years later, Arcadio began to encounter problems in that house, which is unsurprising, as the man started to abuse his daughter. This inappropriate behavior began when she was 5 years old. When she was around 13 years old, Nidia gave birth to her first baby, a boy who was also her brother. For her, this situation was always a tragedy, but her father was indifferent to it. They eventually settled with his family in a small village very far from everything in the south of Colombia, where only the most basic services were available. There were barely 200 families living in the area. Arcadio was a farmer with very few resources. As a result of his precarious economic situation, upon arriving at the place, he settled his family in a fragile and unstable wooden house with a zinc roof and dirt floors. It is noteworthy that by the time Arcadio arrived in that area, the family had 4 children. For the people of the region, initially, nothing seemed too strange. They simply saw the newcomers as good people, even though they were not very sociable or communicative. Nidia was a very reserved young lady and did not socialize with the local residents. In fact, she never left the house unless she was with her father, and she was essentially only seen when going out to buy supplies for the family alongside Arcadio. Some were concerned that she was school-age but did not attend the public school in the town. However, they never inquired about the reasons why the father did not send her to school. One day, reality struck everyone when it became evident that Nidia was pregnant. If she didn't leave the house, didn't have a boyfriend, and her father exercised complete control over her eldest daughter, the only possible conclusion was that the young girl, while a minor, was being abused by her father. But even though the abuse situation was clear to everyone, no one spoke. By the time Nidia was over 20 years old, she had had 11 pregnancies, not all of which came to term, and not all of the babies born survived. Nidia never gave birth in a hospital. It was often up to someone else to help her bring into the world the children fathered by Arcadio. In the small town, everyone gossiped about this. Initially, they were horrified, but nobody said anything. Of the 14 children Arcadio and his daughter Nidia had, in the end, only 8 survived, 3 girls and 5 boys. Only Nidia learned to read and write because her father taught her. The rest had all their rights violated, starting with the right to an identity, since they were never legally registered. It was as if they did not exist. Without an essential document like the birth certificate, they could never enroll in the small local school that around 80 children attended, nor were they vaccinated or treated at the local clinic. Local inhabitants later reported that they saw the irregular couple when they went out shopping and never noticed any affectionate relationship between them. Some neighbors claimed they had the chance to talk with Nidia, but instead of offering help or some kind of support to get out of the situation in which she was the victim, they blamed her. They told her that having intimacy and children with her father was not right. Her response was always to remain silent. No one ever dared to confront Arcadio or reproach his misconduct. Later, some neighbors claimed that while he seemed like a decent man, he was extremely serious, and the people feared he might do something to them. Over time, the forbidden carnal relationship between relatives became something everyone started to accept as normal in the locality. Apparently, on a few occasions, the Alvarez's home was visited by personnel from the local Secretary of Education and the Colombian Institute of Family Welfare, as well as representatives of the Catholic and evangelical churches. The goal of all was to motivate the parents to send the kids to school, but this never had any effect. To make matters worse, these organizations also failed to pay attention to the fact that the children were not legally registered. It seemed that at that moment, the wind was blowing in Arcedio's favor. However, Arcedio pushed the limits too far, and that was the beginning of the end of his sinister plan of subjugation and abuse to the detriment of his entire family. As Nydia later recounted, her father began to show interest in perpetuating his deviant behavior with at least one of his granddaughters, who was around 11 years old. And as if his immoral behavior wasn't enough, he began to insinuate to his older male children that they could do the same. This undoubtedly set off alarms for Nydia, and it could be said that a divine intervention paved the way to the end. Around that time, Orlando, a pastor from the Pentecostal church, spoke to those present at one of his sermons, including Arcedio, who wanted to appear as a correct and faithful man, about the topic of incest and what it meant, labeling it as a terrible sin. This was a turning point in Nydia's life, who, at the end of the meeting, approached the pastor to ask him to pray for her. But the stars were aligning, as around that time, the world learned about the terrible case of Elisabeth Fritzl in Austria, whose father, Joseph Fritzl, kept her captive in the basement of his own house for 24 years, fathering 7 children with her. The case of Elisabeth was so shocking that it seemed people around the world were willing to prevent such situations from being repeated. It was this story that propelled Nydia to make a definitive decision. Also, religious conviction that her father was forcing her to commit a sin, and the fear that one of her daughters could become a victim of the same man added to the need to protect her descendants from the father's brutal assaults. The man, who always had a hellish temperament, beat one of his 6-year-old sons for waking him from his nap by fighting with one of his sisters. That, apparently, was the last straw. At that moment, Nydia confronted her father who, as he always had, reacted by hitting her. This was the strategy the man had used for years to ensure obedience through fear. But this time was different. Fueled by rage and courage, Nydia fought back, something that surprised Arcedio. Nydia knew she had no other option but to leave that house. For that, she not only gathered courage but also had the full support of her older daughters. Trusting in God's will and with the strength gained from her conversations with the pastor, at the first opportunity, Nydia took her 6 youngest children and fled the humble house that had been her prison. The 2 oldest male children, 18 and 16 years old at that time, chose to stay with their father. The group left and headed to a nearby town, where Nydia took some time to settle her family before formally filing a complaint against her father with the authorities. Initially, she only dared to accuse him of having beaten her young son, but later she expanded the complaint to detail the years of abuse she herself had been a victim of. Clearly, before taking any action, the authorities had to conduct an investigation to corroborate the serious accusations Nydia had made. Meanwhile, her 6 children depended solely on her, and they were in a different town where rent had to be paid. But if there was something Nydia was an expert at, it was working hard, so it didn't take too long before she found a job at a local restaurant. She worked exhausting shifts, starting at 5 in the morning and finishing at 8 at night. She devoted 15 hours of her life daily, from Sunday to Sunday, to the demanding job that barely earned her 7,000 pesos, less than $4 at that time. In the meantime, her eldest daughter, 16 years old, took care of her siblings and became the most important support for the suffering mother. However, the authorities who heard Nydia did not make much effort to investigate what happened, and valuable time was lost for the woman and her children, in terms of receiving the support they were justly entitled to from the Colombian state. The first to take real action on the complaint was a family commissioner who, seeing that the case was not being properly addressed, decided to send the information to Hugo Parra, a close collaborator of a counselor. Months had passed after the first complaint was made when Hugo, representing the counselor, arrived at the house occupied by Nydia and her children to learn firsthand what had happened. The man was completely shocked. As Hugo later told the media that covered the story, Nydia and her children were living in extreme poverty. The house they inhabited was in terrible condition, lacking clean water. The smell was almost unbearable, and of Nydia, only her shadow remained, as the 35-year-old woman looked almost 70. At that moment, it was decided to make the case public knowledge and to start a strict follow-up of the progress of the complaint. The following months were dedicated to gathering testimonies that would attest to the truthfulness of Nydia's accusations. Finally, in January 2009, it was considered that there were sufficient elements to present the case to the General Attorney of the nation. Immediately, the highest authority of the public ministry ordered a group of detectives to start investigating the facts officially and in depth. The impunity that Arsadio had enjoyed came to an end on March 27, 2009. That day, agents of the investigation team, known by its initials as CTI, initiated an operation to capture the alleged perpetrator. They had to travel 2 hours through intricate paths to reach the sugarcane plantation where Arsadio was known to be. Finally, the 58-year-old man was detained. In his initial statement to the authorities after being arrested, Arsadio maintained that he had never forced Nydia to engage in inappropriate sexual relations and also asserted that she was not his biological daughter but had been adopted. Needless to say, he also denied having intentions of abusing his daughters, much less having instigated his older sons to do so. Upon hearing her father's statements, Nydia affirmed that he used the same argument of her supposed adoption to abuse her. She added that her father subjected her to the most terrible treatments, besides having her practically imprisoned since she lived locked up and could not go anywhere unless it was with him. Among everything, perhaps the most surprising was when she claimed that he would always be her father and as such, she had to respect him. She then detailed that she always maintained in her conversations with Arsadio, when trying to reason with him, that she loved him as a father and never saw him as a man. On March 28, 2009, the trial against Arsadio Alvarez took place. There, the abuser maintained his version that Nydia was not his biological daughter but an adopted one, and stated that the two had agreed to love each other. What he could not explain was how he could have made such an agreement with a girl of 5 years old, which was the age she was when he violated her for the first time. Following this hearing, Arsadio was transferred to the local jail amidst a crowd gathered at the courthouse gates to shout insults at the abuser. The police had to act quickly to remove him from the place, as many in the crowd wanted to physically assault him. The detainee was charged with sexual abuse, violent carnal access, and incest against his daughter Alba Nydia Alvarez. By that time, the case had become well known, and the press had given it full attention. Despite everything Nydia had suffered, she showed her enormous heart as a mother during her conversation with journalists. She always stated that her greatest fear during all those years of subjugation was that her children might become victims of assaults like she was. Nydia maintained that this was something she never allowed, and she also stated that every interaction with her father made her feel very bad, and she did not want the story to repeat with her daughters, a point she had made very clear to Arsadio, warning him that if he ever laid a hand on any of her daughters, that would be the end of the docile and good person he had known. She hinted in her interaction with the media that she also resented that what was happening to her was an open secret and no one offered her the least bit of support. She confirmed that she never gave birth in a health center. All her childbirths were attended by midwives at home who knew the situation, but only asked if the new baby was the child of the same father. By that time, her oldest child was 19 years old, and the youngest was only 1 year old. In 2009, the trial against Arcidio ended, with no further details found, except, of course, that in response to the accused's claims that Nydia was not his biological daughter, comparative DNA tests were ordered. The Colombian Institute of Forensic Sciences confirmed that the man was lying, as the tests proved she was indeed his daughter. It was also revealed that the prosecution originally tried to add an additional charge for sexual acts against a minor under 14 years of age for an alleged abuse against one of his daughters, but the fact could never be proven, and in the end, the prosecution dropped this charge. The media reported that in the initial session, Arcidio pleaded innocent, but after 12 hours of hearing Nydia's valuable testimony and the DNA evidence, the accused ended up accepting the charges against him and even apologized to his daughter and his grandchildren. With his admission of guilt in October 2009, the presiding judge sentenced Arcidio Alvarez to 15 years and 7 months in prison, a sentence that undoubtedly seemed almost an offense to the victims and did not take into account the number of people whose lives were severely affected. And there was yet another incomprehensible detail. Although the reasons were not found, the sentence was later reduced to 11 years, 7 months, and some days. After the trial and under the protection of the Colombian Institute of Family Welfare, Nydia and her 6 younger children were relocated and placed in a house in good condition in Bogota, the country's capital, with the aim of starting a new life away from the place where everyone knew them and would constantly remind them of what had happened. This is the last information that could be found about this family. And talking about Arcidio, the insufficient sentence was not even fully served, as in 2011, the authorities of that institution reported that Arcidio had died. According to a press release issued by the prison authorities 2 weeks before, the individual had been hospitalized for surgery due to gallstones. But the day after being discharged and returned to prison, the guards found him dead in his cell. The report stated that the death occurred due to natural causes. At the end of this case, the lesson of Nydia's courage and her struggle to provide for her surviving children remained. But the undeniable pain of so many years and the deaths of 6 little ones, either because their pregnancies did not come to term or due to being born under inadequate conditions, was undoubtedly very difficult to overcome. At the time of the events, the director of the Colombian Institute of Family Welfare stated that he had never known a case of this magnitude in Colombia and expressed concern that a situation of so many years had not been denounced by anyone. The official was not only referring to a complaint from the victim, who was the most fragile and had the least opportunity to do so, but also to the community members who knew about the situation but chose to remain silent. In a conversation with the press, one of the sons who stayed with the father tried to make sense of the events from his humble point of view. But the truth is that nothing justifies what happened in this case. Nydia lived for about 30 years dreaming for freedom, but without the courage to obtain it, as the abuse started at such a young age that it left her unable to defend herself. Inside, she was a terrified child, even at the age of 30. After finally being freed from her abusive father, the woman stated that all that went through her mind was the hope that her children could have a better future, that they would study to progress in life, form their homes, and feel at peace. And perhaps the great lesson of this case is advice for other women that Nydia repeated several times to the media. She pointed out that if they found themselves in a similar situation, they should find a way to speak out, to denounce, and trust in God to move forward. For Nydia, silence was her father's perfect accomplice, not just her own silence, but that of all those who, knowing the situation, preferred to look the other way. On June 7, 1977, the state of Ontario, Canada, witnessed the birth of Leah Sousa. Leah's life began with her strong and determined mother, Laura Sousa, who, despite being the single parent, left no stone unturned in ensuring her daughter's well-being. For a considerable time, their world was just the two of them, journeying through life's highs and lows together. As time unfolded, Laura introduced Leah to her new baby brother, Michael. The identity of their father remains undisclosed to the public. While some believe that a father figure was missing from their lives, the addition of Michael brought a sense of completeness to their family. Living in Cumberland Beach, Ontario, a quaint region about 2 hours away from Toronto, the Sousas had a humble abode with a combined living and kitchen area and a single bedroom. But this didn't deter Leah's spirit. She grew into a radiant young girl with a lively sense of humor and zest for life. Leah's academic achievements and her roles as a doting sister and daughter made her family immensely proud. At the age of 13, the Sousa family decided to visit Laura's sister, taking a rejuvenating 6-week summer break. With the Canadian school year commencing the Tuesday after Labor Day, they were soon back in Cumberland Beach, gearing up for the upcoming academic year. As the 1990 Labor Day weekend approached, Leah was eagerly preparing for her impending high school journey. On the night of September 1, while she rested on the couch, Laura and baby Michael slept peacefully in the bedroom. But that tranquility was shattered when, between 1:30 and 3:00 a.m., an unknown individual forcibly entered their home. Initially, the intruder brutally attacked Laura, using a metal object to inflict severe head injuries. He then turned his attention to Leah, assaulting her inside the house before dragging her to the backyard for further violence. The following morning, a friend of Leah's grew concerned after failing to reach her by phone. She decided to check on her, cycling over to the Sousa residence. The horrific sight she discovered was beyond comprehension. Leah's lifeless body lay in the backyard amidst a scene of devastation. The police were immediately alerted, and upon arrival, they found Laura grievously injured but alive. The silver lining amidst the tragedy was that young Michael remained untouched and unaware of the nightmare that had taken place. Laura was rushed to a Toronto-based hospital, where she spent 3 challenging weeks recuperating under tight security, fearing the perpetrator might return. The extent of her injuries required multiple surgeries, leading to the insertion of metal implants in her skull and cheek. One eye was severely damaged, resulting in lasting issues like impaired vision, dizziness, and diminished hearing. The brutal attack on Leah and her mother, who miraculously survived, profoundly shook both law enforcement and the residents of the rural community. In a place where people once led peaceful lives, leaving doors and windows open and letting children cycle freely without any fear, panic began to permeate the air. Parents became hesitant to let their children play outdoors, preferring to keep them close and in sight. Locking doors, securing windows, and keeping weapons nearby for self-defense became commonplace. In fact, out of sheer fear of a nocturnal assault, many residents started keeping a weapon or tool close to their beds. The palpable fear was evident on the faces of the community members. Investigators tirelessly worked to shed light on the events and identify potential suspects. Even though various samples were collected from the crime scene and inside the home, they couldn't find the assailant's DNA. Neither the weapon used in the crime nor the bloodied clothing the perpetrator wore during the attack was ever found. One key clue emerged: a footprint from a size 9 or 10 Nike tennis shoe made of leather. It was believed that Laura might have seen the attacker, but due to her injuries, she could not recall any events from that night. Investigators theorized that the individual who took Leah's life might have been familiar with the family and their vulnerabilities, noting their secluded living area and the absence of a male figure in the household, a single mother with an infant and a teenage daughter. Furthermore, detectives hypothesized that the attacker knew the region well, possibly being a resident or a frequent visitor, and was aware that the family was alone that particular night. One person of interest identified was Brian Timothy Elson from a nearby town. 4 months after Leah's tragic end, Brian took the life of 17-year-old Sandra Bannister in a place less than 13 kilometers from where the Sousa family lived. While Brian denied any involvement, the police suspected he was in Cumberland Beach on the night of the assault on the Sousa household. However, after questioning, he was released. He was never charged for Leah's murder, but pleaded guilty to manslaughter in Sandra's case, serving only 6 years in prison. After his release, due to concerns about his potential threat, the courts allowed the police to monitor his movements for 3 years, though this led to no further developments. As the authorities persisted in their investigations, Laura grappled with the gaps in her memory. Eager to recall the events of that fateful night, she tried various methods, including hypnosis and the controversial use of sodium pentothal, commonly known as truth serum. However, these attempts were in vain. Later, she turned to a renowned expert in brain science in Ontario. He attempted to stimulate Laura's damaged right brain hemisphere with magnetic fields to retrieve memories. Sadly, this effort also failed. He explained that human memories don't instantly solidify. Experiences take 20 to 30 minutes to permanently store in our brains. Unfortunately, during Laura's attack, this critical window was lost. He compared it to shutting down a computer without saving, suggesting that the memory might be lost forever, a heartbreaking outcome for Laura. In 2008, Ontario Provincial Police launched a billboard campaign along the highway near the Sousa residence, seeking new leads on Leah's case. This initiative yielded some promising testimonials. That same year, an intriguing tip led to an extensive search for the murder weapon on a wooded property in Cumberland Beach. However, the search came up empty, and Leah's case remained unresolved. In 2010, marking the 20th anniversary of the crime, the news program ran a feature on Leah's case. During their investigation, they found out that Brian's grandmother, a person of significant interest in the case due to her association with another similar attack, lived on the same street as the Sousa at the time of the incident. Brian was reportedly staying with her during that period. When a reporter located Brian at his home and questioned him about the assault leading to Leah's death, he denied any involvement. He claimed he was at a party in another town that night, where 60 witnesses could confirm his alibi. Over the decades since the murder, more than 1,500 people have been interviewed by the police. The quest for answers in Leah's tragic case continues. On one occasion, Laura spoke to the media, expressing her growing concerns that the case might never be solved. However, she maintained hope that one day she would come to know what transpired and why. The grieving mother pleaded with the community not to forget her daughter. Even though she couldn't remember the events of that fateful night, the haunting memories continued to torment her, and she wasn't the only one scared by the tragic events of the summer night in 1990. Officers who investigated Leah's case, along with the journalists who covered it, acknowledged the horror that continued to grip them. By 2020, an investigator of the Ontario Provincial Police, the last in a series of investigators who had been on the case since Labor Day 1990, described the brutality as off the charts. He stated that both mother and daughter, deep in sleep, stood no chance against the attacker as they were ambushed and severely beaten. At that point, he revealed that the police believed a pipe or an iron wrench might have been the weapon used by the assailant. Yet they held back further investigative details to avoid jeopardizing the case. Regrettably, as the years since Leah's assault and the severe injuries inflicted on her mother, Laura, passed, the mystery of that night remained unsolved. More than 2 decades after the incident, the police reiterated that there were individuals who had information about the events and could potentially help solve the case. Despite a reward offer of $50,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator, that crucial piece of evidence never materialized. Still, they encouraged anyone who believed they had even the slightest information to come forward. Jim Van Allen, a criminal profiler with the Ontario Provincial Police, had studied around 850 fatal assaults before retiring in 2010. He dedicated significant years of his career trying to understand the motives behind heinous crimes and how to prevent them. When discussing Leah's case, he stated that while all violent deaths are tragic, some, like Leah's, are unforgettable. To Jim, the crime scene, which looked like a dollhouse in a tidy 60-square-meter space without a basement, suggested that the attack was personal and intimate. Given that the family had only recently moved in and only locals knew they were home, he surmised that the aggressor was local and likely acted alone. In Jim's analysis, the intruder, equipped with a metal tool to break a window pane, likely had a sinister plan for the night. The level of violence exhibited indicated the act wasn't just a random outburst, but rather a manifestation of deep-seated sadism. Jim hypothesized that the assailant, already predisposed to violence, might have been at a personal breaking point, possibly under the influence and driven by a lifetime of resentments. He pondered if the man had a recent argument or felt particularly humiliated that day, suggesting past humiliations could have acted as a trigger for his rage. The profiler believed that the attacker might have known Laura and been interested in her. However, as a single mother, she would have been out of his league, like many other women. Jim's analysis suggested that while the intruder was likely known in the community, he wasn't particularly well-liked, leading women to instinctively fear him. From Jim's assessment, while criminals typically flee their localities after committing heinous acts, he felt Leah's assailant might have remained nearby. Perhaps he cleaned his stained clothes and discarded the metallic instrument. The attacker's potential financial constraints and limited resources might have dictated this choice. Though not exceptionally astute, the culprit had the cunning to remain silent. In Jim's professional estimation, this person showed no regret for Leah's untimely death and likely felt indifferent about Laura's fortunate survival. But all these speculations and years of persistent investigation couldn't bring them any closer to the elusive perpetrator. In a twist in 2014, Barry Rule, an ex-officer of the Ontario Provincial Police with 3 decades of service, unveiled a book named A Viable Suspect: Multiple Murders and the Limits of a Police Force in Canada's Most Noted Unsolved Mystery. Barry's narrative raised suspicions about a serial criminal, dubbed Larry Towlett in his writings, connecting him to Leah's demise and other similar incidents in southwest Ontario. A personal encounter with this man named Larry in 1971 was recounted by Barry, wherein Larry trespassed and assaulted his fiancée. This attack was thwarted by Barry, who noticed the intruder's method of entry. Breaking a rear window resembled the approach at the Sousa residence. Larry, known as a traveling salesman in southwest Ontario, had his vehicle inspected, revealing a rape kit. Yet, regardless of Barry's insights into recurring patterns, Larry escaped intense scrutiny and passed away without ever being a legally recognized suspect. Even as Barry's book garnered attention, it didn't decisively resolve the cases hinting at Larry's involvement. Commemorating the 25th year of Leah's tragic end in 2015, Laura echoed sentiments of profound sorrow and exasperation, mourning the stolen potential of Leah's life. Investigators, over the years, left no stone unturned, pursuing leads, deploying multimedia investigations, revisiting evidence, and meticulously studying the comprehensive case files, among the most voluminous in police records. With the belief that someone local held the key to unlocking Leah's murder mystery, the police broadcasted a plea for information, spotlighting a $50,000 reward. Leah's mother lamented that even after years, she couldn't recollect the events of that devastating night. The knowledge that clues about the identity of the assailant responsible for Leah's tragic end were locked away in her memory was tormenting. Driving past the house became a somber task for many in the community. Paul Peavin spoke about the profound impact this incident had on their lives. Even though he never knew Leah personally, the chilling details of her fate left him and his peers deeply shaken. Parents became overly cautious, restricting their children's outdoor activities. In a time without the rapid information spread of social media, whispers of fear propagated through the community. A new detective took over the case in 2019, and he has been diligently collaborating with experts from similar past cases. The case file, vast and complex, demanded exhaustive scrutiny to uncover any overlooked evidence. Though he didn't divulge specifics on whether they believed a single individual or multiple were involved, he emphasized the continual re-examination of evidence from 1990, thanks to modern forensic methods. Even after over 30 years, the brutal demise of Leah Sousa remains an unresolved mystery. The collective efforts of the community and law enforcement have yet to bring the perpetrator to justice. This harrowing case serves as a grim reminder to the community about the imperativeness of vigilance and unity. Authorities, meanwhile, are unwavering in their quest for justice. Leah's memory remains etched in the community, continually underscoring the importance of justice and safety for all. Ruth Penelope Penny Bell, known to most as Penny, was born on February 28, 1948, in Somerset, England. Her childhood was a mix of highs and lows. As a teenager, family problems intensified, leading 16-year-old Penny to leave home to start a new life. Despite her young age and lack of resources, she managed to forge ahead, buoyed by her energetic and friendly personality. Eventually, Penny married, and at the age of 30, in 1978, she gave birth to a son named Matthew. Details about her early adult life are sparse, including information about her first marriage, which was relatively short. In 1981, Penny married Alistair Bell, a successful real estate agent. They had been friends before their marriage, and Alistair readily accepted Matthew, raising him as his own son. To outsiders, they appeared to be a stable and prosperous couple. In 1982, Penny and Alistair welcomed their daughter, Lauren, Penny's second child, and the first from her marriage with Bell. The family seemed to be thriving, settling into a comfortable home. The Bells' finances improved significantly, and in October 1987, they moved with their two children to a house valued at £500,000, approximately $626,000, in Baker's Wood, in Buckinghamshire, an area regarded as a haven for celebrities at the time. Their life seemed idyllic, with a harmonious home free of any obvious strife. They enjoyed the privileges and comforts their financial situation afforded them. By the early 1990s, Penny had established herself as a successful businesswoman. She was highly organized, managing her busy schedule meticulously. Alistair also did well professionally, and though their family home was comfortably equipped, in the summer of 1991, the Bells hired a renovation team to refresh their home's aesthetics. They could easily afford the renovation expenses. Little did they know that their seemingly perfect world was about to collapse, and a tragic event would soon expose family secrets that no one could have imagined. June 6, 1991, began like any other day for the Bells. Alistair left the house at 8:30 a.m., as usual, to drop his son at school before heading to work. He bid farewell to his wife, who appeared radiant and cheerful as always. The night before, Alistair had noticed Penny seemed worried, but she assured him she was just exhausted. Alistair believed her, as she fell asleep quickly. He thought the stress of the home renovations was taking a toll on her energy. As Alistair left with his son in the car, he noticed Penny didn't give her usual hand wave goodbye. but he attributed this to her being preoccupied with many things, including the disruptions caused by the renovation work. Later that morning, around 9:40 a.m., Penny left her home and got into her Arctic Blue Jaguar XJS. Before departing, she briefly spoke with the workers renovating her property, informing them she was in a hurry due to an appointment at 9:50 a.m. Strangely, Penny hadn't mentioned this commitment to her husband, nor had she recorded it in her diary or any other documents. She left hastily for this mysterious meeting. The morning proceeded as usual until, later that day around noon, a shocking discovery at the parking lot of the Gurnell Leisure Centre in Greenford, London, forever changed the course of events. A passerby reported to the police the sight of a woman's bloody body inside a parked car. The vehicle was identified as a blue Jaguar. Responding officers immediately noticed multiple stab wounds on the victim's body. Inside the car were the woman's belongings, quickly identifying her as 43-year-old Ruth Penelope Penny Bell. As the investigation began, her body was sent to the coroner's office, where it was determined she had been stabbed approximately 50 times in the chest and arms in what police described as a frenzied attack. Within the crime scene, the central console of the vehicle contained samples of wallpaper intended for the Bell's bedroom. Investigators found it peculiar that Penny had received these samples 15 days earlier, yet she had never shown them to her family. It appeared Penny might have been showing the wallpaper to someone in the car, or perhaps this person intentionally placed them there to stage the scene and mislead investigators. The only person Penny had discussed the wallpaper with was the interior decorator working at her home. That morning, she mentioned seeking the second opinion about the color, which is why she had them with her. Forensic investigations revealed more details about the brutal attack. It was determined that the assailant had stabbed Penny from the passenger seat, then exited the vehicle and attacked her again from the driver's window. Despite the implications, no one witnessed the attack. Police tried to reconstruct Penny's last movements that day and discovered that on June 3, 1991, 3 days before her murder, she had withdrawn £8,500, about $10,600, in cash from the joint bank account she shared with her husband. The purpose of this large cash withdrawal was unknown, especially since she had never withdrawn such a significant sum before. The police believed Penny had this money when she died, but it was not found in the car. Although robbery could be considered a motive, Penny's purse and wallet were still in the vehicle, making it strange for a thief to attack the victim so viciously. On June 8, 1991, the police held a press conference where it was reported that the parking lot of Gurnell Leisure Centre was very crowded at the time of the crime. The lot had 153 spaces and was almost full. However, the killer had an advantage. Penny's car was parked in front of a natural hedge barrier, obstructing the view from the front. This location might have been chosen by the killer for its potential to attack and escape unnoticed. Investigators believe the murderer would have been heavily blood-stained after the merciless attack, and it was likely that someone had seen them, as it would have been difficult to go unnoticed. Police requested the community's help, asking anyone who observed anything unusual to come forward. However, no witnesses reported seeing anyone covered in blood near the crime scene. Witnesses did, however, report sightings of Penny on the morning of her death. Around 9:45 a.m., a woman walking her dog near Penny's home saw a man in a brown or bronze car waiting on the side of the road. She stated that a blue Jaguar pulled up next to the car, and a man got into the passenger seat. Penny's blue Jaguar was quite distinctive, making it highly likely that it was her. The man was described as around 40 years old, of medium build, wearing a light shirt and dark trousers. Penny's usual route to the office was via the A40. A truck driver reported seeing the car matching the Jaguar's description in Greenford just before 10:30 a.m. He noticed the car was moving very slowly and had a passenger in the front seat. The driver seemed to be trying to park, but the passenger kept correcting the direction, steering the car back onto the road. As the witness passed the car, he saw the man's hand on the wheel, and noticed a gold chain on his right wrist. Several other witnesses reported seeing the same blue car with its hazard lights on, moving very slowly and occasionally veering into the opposite lane. Despite these observations, no one paid much attention or stopped to see if the driver needed help. Others claimed to have seen Penny's car in the Gurnell Leisure Center parking lot. However, the car was strategically parked near a hedge, limiting visibility from the front. A woman walking through the parking lot noticed the windshield wipers moving on a dry, sunny day and the hazard lights flashing, but she did not look inside the car. These sightings in the public pool parking lot happened less than an hour after Penny left her house. Another witness saw the blue Jaguar with a dark-haired man in the passenger seat. He watched the car enter the parking lot and saw the driver, presumably Penny, look at him and silently mouth a plea for help, though he heard nothing. Despite this, he ignored the call for help and continued on his way. Around 10:45 a.m., a witness saw a man leaving the swimming pool parking lot on foot. He was described as elegantly dressed and not carrying the swim bag, suggesting he wasn't there to swim. It was noted that one side of his face appeared disfigured. Penny had been stabbed multiple times, but the witness did not see any blood on the man's clothes. Similarly, a driver reported seeing a car speeding along Greenford Road. She said she pulled in front of it, thinking there was enough time, but the car quickly closed the distance due to its high speed. The driver signaled with his lights and shouted for her to move aside. Initially, she didn't let him pass but became frightened and stopped. The police were perplexed by these testimonies and the general indifference of those who noticed something amiss but did nothing. Investigators firmly believed that Penny knew her killer. During their examination, they found fingerprints in Penny's car belonging to a man named John Richmond, a former neighbor of Penny and Alastair in Whitmore Road in Harrow, before the family moved in 1987. John, who had a criminal record for forgery and smuggling, was arrested in April 1992 and held in police custody until July 1992. He was eventually released after the police decided not to press charges. In December 1994, John contacted the Daily Sun newspaper, claiming he was the person Penny had planned to meet on the morning of her murder, but that they had parted ways before she was killed. He also claimed her death was a contract killing and that he knew the perpetrator. He offered to reveal the name in exchange for £80,000, about $100,000. However, authorities suspected this was an attempt to recoup losses from a recent bankruptcy. Instead of paying John for the information, the Daily Sun contacted the police. Without anything to corroborate his claims or conclusively link him to Penny's murder, the police assumed his statements were false and driven by financial interest, and no charges were brought against him. Alastair, Penny's husband, was also considered a suspect, being the primary beneficiary of his wife's estate and life insurance. However, there was no evidence linking him to the murder, and he had a solid alibi confirmed by coworkers. Media speculation also arose about Alastair's homosexual affair, suggesting his lover might have killed Penny out of jealousy. Penny was aware of her husband's bisexuality. When they met, Alastair was in a relationship with another man, who even participated in their wedding ceremony. Police rigorously questioned Alastair about this, but later ruled him out as a suspect. It was also revealed that until 1982, when daughter Lauren was born, Penny had volunteered at Samaritans, a charity offering emotional support to people dealing with issues like anxiety, distress, and suicidal thoughts. The police considered the possibility that Penny might have acted as a counselor to someone mentally unstable, leading to the murder. However, this theory did not hold up. The investigation concluded it was very likely Penny knew her killer, but establishing a motive proved challenging. The robbery theory didn't fit the scene, though the whereabouts of the money she withdrew the day before remained unknown. There was no evidence of sexual assault, yet the frenzied nature of the attack suggested a personal motive. In 1993, John Bradley, a former royal stewardess, was similarly murdered with a knife as she got into her BMW in East London. Newspapers nationwide quickly reported the similarities between the two murders. Both victims were successful business executives in their 40s and died within 5 kilometers of each other. Like in Penny's case, Jean was not sexually assaulted, and her purse remained intact in her car. A witness saw the suspected murderer fleeing the scene and chased him, but lost him in an underground parking lot. Blood and DNA traces found at the crime scene did not match Jen. However, investigators could not link the samples to anyone and found no connection between the two murders. To this day, the murder of Jen Bradley remains unsolved. Following the failed attempt to link Penny's case with Jean's, the police resumed their investigation. They considered convicted murderer Robert Napper as a suspect but ultimately ruled him out. The officers later announced that up to 30 people who might have been in the parking lot at the time of the businesswoman's murder had not yet come forward to report if they saw anything on the morning of June 6, 1991. Alistair Bell made a public plea for witnesses, but it was in vain. During the investigation, over 8,000 people were interviewed, and more than 2,500 written statements were recorded. Although Michael Flynn, a business associate of Alistair and Penny, offered a reward of £20,000, approximately $25,000, for evidence leading to a conviction, the case grew cold. The tragedy of Penny Bell's murder didn't end in June 1991. 10 years later, when Lauren was 19, her father Alistair told her he no longer had the capacity to love and asked her to leave the family home. Her older brother, Matthew, had left for boarding school a few years earlier. Over the years, Lauren has given several interviews, expressing that everything in her family seemed to break apart from the moment her mother died. She described her mother as the glue that held everyone close, and since her passing, friends and family drifted apart, which she found deeply saddening. Lauren remarked that contrary to the belief that families come together in the wake of tragedy, her family experienced the opposite. She lamented that while similar cases often see families holding candlelight vigils and trying to love each other more, the Bells mourned differently. She said that since 1992, her father has been a prisoner of his own grief, no longer seeing or speaking to anyone and still living in the family home. Lauren noted that the lack of maintenance on the grounds of their once imposing property made it appear abandoned. In 2022, Lauren, now a mother herself, gave an interview. She revealed that she had become a detective in an attempt to solve the mystery of what happened to Penny. She enlisted the support of former Metropolitan Police Detective Brian Edwards, who led the initial investigation into the murder and retired in 1999. The two teamed up since 2021, marking 30 years since Penny's murder, and are determined to solve the mystery surrounding the horrendous crime. Lauren announced they would offer a reward of €20,000 for any information that could help identify the perpetrator and bring them to justice. Retired Detective Edwards stated to the same media outlet that Penny's case had always troubled him, and when Lauren contacted him, he did not hesitate to get involved again. Together, they are scrutinizing every detail of Penny's life to find new evidence, hopeful they will uncover the culprit and, with police support, bring the killer to justice. More than 2 decades after Penny Bell's bloody body was found in her distinctive blue Jaguar, the case remains one of the most enduring and enigmatic unsolved crimes in the United Kingdom during the 20th century. This horrible case took place in Lausada, a village situated in the northern region of Portugal, a location known for its vineyards, renowned green wine, and its distinction as the youngest population in the country. Nestled in the heart of the municipality bearing the same name, this village is in close proximity to the northwest coast of Portugal, a hub of summer enjoyment for tourists hailing from various corners of Europe. Within this quaint village, on January 28, 1987, Rui Pedro Teixeira was born. His parents, Filomena and Manuel, lauded his lively and jovial nature along with his remarkable creativity and imagination. In a nutshell, this family, complete with their youngest daughter Karina, led a harmonious and contented life. Rui Pedro was a bundle of energy as a child. After completing his daily school assignments, he engaged in spirited soccer matches with his beloved cousin João Andre and other local children. His aspiration was to become a professional goalkeeper, and thus he consistently played in that role. Among the boys' other pastimes was cycling, and he could often be spotted zipping through the village to ensure he reached his daily math tutoring sessions punctually. However, one shadow cast over his otherwise serene childhood. Rui Pedro grappled with epilepsy. Manuel and Filomena were the proprietors of a driving school. One day, an ordinary young man named Afonso Dias arrived at the academy with aspirations of obtaining his driver's license. Filomena swiftly discovered that Afonso was facing financial hardship. Renowned for her exceptional empathy, she immediately sought ways to assist him. Initially, she provided him with clothing, and as their bond deepened, she extended the opportunity for him to work at the school, enabling him to earn extra income. 3 years passed, and thanks to Filomena's kindness, Afonso became a truck driver at just 22 years old. The family trusted Afonso so much that they relied on him to pick up Rui Pedro and Karina from school and bring them back home. To do this, Afonso used his brother's car, a Fiat Uno. As they spent time together every day, an unusual friendship blossomed between Afonso and Rui Pedro. The family didn't think it was strange, especially because Afonso had a youthful and childlike personality, which made him and Rui Pedro feel like brothers. However, the maternal grandparents viewed their relationship with suspicion. Manuel, on the other hand, was concerned about Afonso smoking around the child and considered him a bad influence. Worried about the consequences of this friendship, Manuel talked to Filomena about it, but she was convinced of Afonso's good character and believed he meant no harm. In the end, like in any good marriage, they reached a compromise, with Filomena agreeing to keep an eye on their interactions. On March 4, 1998, around 2 p.m., Rui Pedro rode his bicycle to his mother's workplace, which was just a few blocks away from home, to tell her that Afonso had invited him for a ride in his brother's car. Filomena wasn't happy about the idea and told him not to go. Instead, she sent him to a nearby field where his friends were waiting to play soccer, emphasizing the importance of making it to his 5 p.m. class on time. Though he was initially disappointed, Rui Pedro obeyed. He removed his bicycle helmet and headed to the soccer field. When he arrived, he found his friends, except for João Andre, whom his mother didn't allow to go out. Surprisingly, a black Fiat Uno driven by Afonso pulled into the field a few minutes later and stopped beside Rui Pedro. They had a short conversation, and then the child put aside his bicycle helmet, got into the car, and bid farewell to his friends through the passenger window with a simple gesture. Between 5 and 6 in the afternoon, a phone call shattered the family's peace and marked the start of the Teixeira family's worst days. Rui Pedro's tutor called to inform them that the boy hadn't attended his class. This was highly unusual since Rui Pedro had never missed a class before. Panic set in as his parents feared that an unexpected epileptic seizure might have rendered him unconscious, potentially causing severe brain damage if he didn't receive prompt attention. The news quickly spread throughout the village, and concerned residents sprang into action. They organized small search teams to cover the entire town. Soon, they found their first clue. A neighbor reported that around 3 p.m., he had spotted Rui Pedro's bicycle hidden among the bushes near the soccer field where he had been playing. Manuel and Filomena knew their son very well. They understood that his bicycle meant the world to him, and he wouldn't just leave it behind without a good reason. This led them to believe that Rui Pedro might have been taken against his will. Without hesitation, they rushed to the police station to report his disappearance. Upon receiving the report, the police launched their investigation by questioning the 3 boys who had been playing soccer with Rui Pedro. These friends recounted how a black car had entered the field to pick up their friend, identifying Afonso as the driver. They emphasized that Afonso's behavior had been strange and controlling toward their young companion. Initially, the officers doubted the children's accounts and chose to disregard their statements. However, they mentioned the misleading lead to the mother, which raised her suspicions. Filomena then mentioned Rui Pedro's request from that same afternoon to meet up with his friend. Immediately, everyone's attention turned to the truck driver, and the authorities proceeded to search his home. Afonso welcomed the officers who wanted to ask him some routine questions. As the last person who had seen the child, his statement could provide crucial information. However, the truck driver remained unusually calm and claimed not to have seen Rui Pedro. His reaction raised suspicion among the agents, given the numerous testimonies they had collected. Consequently, he was taken to the police station for further questioning. Once at the precinct, Afonso attempted to offer an excuse. He mentioned that his brother had asked him to take the car for its annual inspection, a mandatory requirement in Portugal for vehicles over 8 years old. However, records showed that he had never attended the scheduled appointment for that afternoon. Afonso persisted with his story, continuing to deny that the child had gotten into the car hours earlier. He admitted to a brief encounter of only 5 minutes with Rui Pedro before 2 p.m. Afterward, he claimed to have driven to a nearby town, which was about 15 kilometers from Lausada, and parked in front of a pharmacy. Afonso asserted that he stayed in the car for a while before deciding to take a stroll through the city, even mentioning that he admired the shop windows. When he grew tired, he drove to his girlfriend's house, arriving at 6:45 p.m. The woman lived in another village in the region, just 11 minutes away from Lausada. Meanwhile, at the police station reception, Rui Pedro's grandfather and cousin anxiously waited, determined to apply pressure to expedite the investigations. When Afonso's interrogation concluded, the two of them crossed paths with the suspect in the hallways. Upon seeing him, the grandfather desperately inquired about his grandson's whereabouts and offered anything in exchange for an answer. Afonso broke down in tears and insisted that he didn't know where the child was, but he warned that if they wanted to find him, it was essential to close all borders because he had probably been kidnapped and was on his way to a foreign country. The cousin also confronted Afonso and even mentioned a conversation they had with Rui Pedro the day before. The man's only response was to shout at the boy to be quiet once and for all, but the cousin remained unfazed. On the contrary, he continued the narrative with more details. Afonso had offered to take both of them to meet prostitutes and said that the meeting point would be a vacant lot. Following these events, a large-scale police investigation was launched in the region, involving local residents, firefighters, and even the assistance of bloodhounds to find the trail of the lost child. The officers believed that the boy might have had a seizure and was unconscious somewhere in the village. Or maybe he had simply wandered far away and couldn't find his way back. In summary, they considered it a case of a search and rescue, ruling out the hypothesis of kidnapping. Rui Pedro's family was outraged by this approach to the case. Due to the extensive dissemination of Rui Pedro's images in the local media, a sex worker recognized his face and contacted the local police. She stated without hesitation that on March 4, 1998, a black car had stopped in front of her on a desolate road. The driver offered her $10 to have sex with the little boy who accompanied him. She asked how old the boy was, and the man replied that he was old enough. The woman took him behind some bushes by the side of the road and looked for a private place where no one could see them. There was no sexual contact. The little boy was very terrified, crying nonstop and repeating over and over again that he wanted to leave. Seeing the child in such a distraught state, the sex worker couldn't help but feel compassion for him. She spent around 15 minutes trying to comfort him. She hugged him tightly and assured him that everything would eventually be all right. Amidst his sobs, he confided in her that he had been forced to attend that meeting. After emerging from the bushes, the child got into the car, and that was the last time she saw him. All signs pointed to a kidnapping, But even with this compelling witness statement, the police still hesitated to fully embrace this theory. In a desperate plea, the family begged the authorities to act urgently, stressing that each passing moment could be critical to the child's survival. The following morning, just after the court's opening, Begg managed to persuade the public prosecutor's office to request the intervention of the Judicial Police, a specialized agency responsible for investigating serious crimes like homicides, kidnappings, organized crime, and terrorism. Within 24 hours of Rua Pedro's last sighting, several judicial police officers arrived in the town. In the subsequent days, alongside family members and neighbors, they meticulously combed through the entire region, suspecting that Rui Pedro might have been left somewhere. The distribution of posters featuring the child's photograph escalated, reaching a national level, and the entire country of Portugal was deeply shaken by the case. The disappearance of the child sparked an overwhelming sense of collective sorrow. People referred to Rui Pedro as our boy or our little Pedro. Simultaneously, the family began receiving a barrage of phone calls, many of which were tormenting and distressing. Some claimed to have Rui Pedro in their custody, while others provided leads to his whereabouts that ultimately led nowhere. The most audacious callers even demanded a ransom payment. One particular and terrifying call featured a child whose voice sounded eerily similar to Rui Pedro's. Amidst screams and tears, he desperately called out for his mother. Citing the challenge of tracing all communications, the police decided not to pursue any leads that came through phone calls. The family's desperation grew, and the omission of potentially valuable information for the ongoing investigation appeared both inept and negligent. In April 1998, 1 month after the disappearance, a suspicion emerged. A renowned Portuguese journalist traveled to Disneyland in Paris with his wife and children for a report intended to be published in a widely read magazine with national circulation in Portugal. The article featured a series of portraits of him and his family at various park attractions. Among these images, one particular photograph raised alarm bells. In the background, a small child could be seen with a man dressed in red. Filomena and Manuel saw the photograph and firmly asserted that it was Rui Pedro. In September of the same year, a significant breakthrough occurred as the British police dismantled a pedophile network in an operation known as Operation Cathedral. This organization primarily operated online and served as a database with thousands of photos and videos depicting sexually abused children. This operation gained high-profile attention due to the unusually large amount of pornographic content possessed, produced, and distributed by this organization's members. Shockingly, they discovered more than 750,000 photos and 1,800 videos. Out of the 1,263 individuals featured in the seized material, only 17 were identified. 1 from Argentina, 1 from Chile, 1 from Portugal, 6 from the UK, and 7 from the United States. Filomena confirmed that Rui Pedro appeared in some of those photos, confirming that he was still alive, but nothing more. There were no coordinates or leads to his possible location. The British police speculated that members of the network had abused him on camera and then potentially harmed him. Over the next 13 years, the Public Ministry of Portugal built a case against Afonso, who consistently maintained his innocence. The trial began in November 2011. The key testimonies came from Rui Pedro's 3 friends, forming the backbone of the case. While the judge could verify certain facts presented by the prosecution, the court dismissed several testimonies due to a lack of conclusive evidence. In March 2012, Afonso was acquitted. On Rui Pedro's 27th birthday, January 28, 2014, a video was published that quickly went viral on social media. Some actors voluntarily participated in this video campaign. Their aim was to search for new clues about Rui Pedro's whereabouts, while also including the email addresses of the Northern Board of Judicial Police and the Portuguese Association for Missing Children to ensure that the young man's case would not fade into obscurity. This campaign had a broader goal of denouncing child trafficking for sexual exploitation. Returning to the legal proceedings, Afonso's freedom was short-lived. After an appeal by Rui Pedro's family in 2014, a new ruling from the Porto Court of Appeals sentenced him to 3 years in prison. This sentence was for inciting a minor to engage in involuntary sexual relations, but it was not related to the kidnapping or any other charges linked to the disappearance itself. Despite Afonso's defense attorney filing an appeal, this second ruling was confirmed by the Portuguese Supreme Court. On October 3, 2014, the resolution was ratified, and on March 18, 2015, Afonso was taken into custody after the police issued an arrest warrant. He was released on parole in March 2017, having served only 2/3 of his sentence. Afonso continued to maintain his innocence, claiming to be the victim of a grave injustice. 20 years after the disappearance in 2019, Rui Pedro was officially declared presumed dead. The police concluded their search as no further leads had emerged since Operation Cathedral, and the case had gone cold. The young man's whereabouts remain a painful mystery. Despite the ceaseless pain and the enduring void of not knowing what happened to her son, Filomena did not give up. In 2007, she founded the Association of Relatives of Missing Children. Rui Pedro's case highlighted a grave issue. We are confronted with a deeply serious phenomenon. Every year, 3 million children are kidnapped worldwide. In Portugal alone, there are over 60 missing children and minors. Marianne Bachmeier was born on June 3, 1950, in Sarstedt, West Germany. Her family ended up there following the public persecution and scrutiny her father faced for being a former official of the German National Socialist Party. During World War II, he was a member of the notorious SS. As a result, Marianne was raised in a very conservative home by deeply religious tutors. It's said that she never had a happy childhood due to a lack of close relationship with her parents. Her father was authoritarian, abusive, and an alcoholic, often spending more time at a bar near their home than with his family. Marianne's mother was also distant, rarely speaking or spending time with her daughter. The situation worsened due to her father's drinking, which increased his aggression towards the family. This ended with the parents' divorce and the father leaving the house. Marianne thought she could finally be free and happy, but soon her mother remarried another abusive man. Unfortunately, instead of Marianne and her mother uniting against the man, they both turned against Marianne, blaming her for the family's problems. This broke their relationship, and Marianne, seen as a troublesome teenager, was eventually kicked out of the house. During her adolescence, Marianne faced multiple assaults from different men, leading to the birth of her first child at just 16. She was forced to give the baby up for adoption due to lack of resources and because the baby's father abandoned her. 2 years later, Marianne got pregnant again by her then abusive boyfriend. Despite the circumstances, she wanted to keep the baby, but before the child's birth, she experienced another traumatic assault at a nightclub. Her boyfriend left her, and she gave up this second child for adoption as well. Later, Marianne dropped out of school and sought work to support herself. She started working at a bar named Tipasa, where she met the manager, and after some time, they became a couple. At 22, she became pregnant with her third child and felt ready to raise the baby with some resources and a home. However, her then boyfriend disagreed with her decision, ending their relationship. Marianne, firm in her choice, decided to raise her daughter, Anna, alone, despite her parents' demands to give her up for adoption like her previous children. After Anna's birth, Marianne vowed to be a good mother and underwent a tubal ligation, a common practice at the time to prevent overpopulation. Marianne and Anna lived together in Lübeck, Germany, and despite challenges, they made it through. Indeed, Marianne was happy because her daughter was the only person in her life who did not intend to harm her, unlike her parents or ex-partners. However, raising Anna alone meant Marianne had to take her to work at the bar, so she could only attend to her daughter during her few breaks. Years later, people close to Marianne would say that she treated Anna like a little adult and expected her to take care of many things on her own from a young age. Anna often slept in the bar while Marianne was working, and a friend described Anna as a very vibrant and creative child who unfortunately never had a pleasant family life, as she only occasionally saw her father at the bar. Some stories also mention that Marianne worked late into the night and then slept all day, leaving her 7-year-old daughter alone for much of the day. Anna used this time to play around the neighborhood alone, greeting people and playing with their pets. It was even mentioned that Marianne was aware of her problematic lifestyle and sometimes contemplated the idea of giving Anna up for adoption. This leads us to May 5, 1980, where it is unclear exactly what happened that morning between Anna and Marianne. Some say they argued because Anna woke up in a bad mood and stubbornly did not want to go to school but wanted to play in the park, which Marianne did not allow. There's another version where Anna asked permission from her mother to skip school to play in the park with friends, and Marianne eventually let her go, not suspecting her daughter's real intentions to play elsewhere. Regardless, Anna was playing outside when the ensuing events turned into a tragedy in Marianne's life. When Marianne returned home later that day, she found it strange not to find her daughter anywhere but decided to wait a few more hours for her return. As time passed and Anna did not return, Marianne started searching the neighborhood. She asked Anna's friends and locals if they knew anything about her daughter, but nobody knew anything. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. So Marianne reported this anomaly to the police. The next day, a very upset and nervous woman arrived at the police. It seemed that this man, Klaus Grabowski, 35 years old, was overcome with guilt after the act and couldn't find peace. He ended up confessing in detail what happened to his girlfriend. This caused a great argument, after which he left, confused, to go to a bar for a beer. His girlfriend took this opportunity to go to the police station to report him. The truth was that Anna had been abducted by Klaus, who owned a butcher shop near Marianne's house. Anna had gone there intending to play because the man had promised her that she could play with his cats whenever she wanted to visit. Innocently, Anna went and rang the doorbell. Klaus received her and kept her in his house for several hours, assaulting her multiple times until finally, to prevent the child from confessing the facts, he ended her life by suffocation with a pair of his girlfriend's stockings. Klaus Grabowski had a history of criminal activities and had previously been convicted for the assault of 2 young girls. He was known to have a troubled past. In 1973, he attacked a 6-year-old girl and was charged with attempted murder. 2 years later, he faced charges for these crimes, leading to a psychological evaluation. The results indicated he had an abnormal sexual instinct and significantly limited capacity to control it. Consequently, he was sent to a psychological treatment center instead of prison. A few years later, Klaus was offered the option of undergoing a controversial chemical castration procedure in exchange for early release, which he readily accepted. This procedure involved administering drugs to reduce libido and testosterone levels, reducing the likelihood of reoffending. Klaus preferred this option over returning to a mental health facility. It was a common practice for offenders of such crimes, often resulting in reduced sentences under the assumption that they no longer posed a societal threat. Despite the reversibility of this procedure, Klaus was released soon after undergoing it, without subsequent psychological evaluations. 2 years later, he underwent hormonal treatment to reverse the chemical castration. increasing his testosterone levels. This treatment was approved by the court under the pretext that he wanted to start a family with his girlfriend and lead a normal life, thus misleading everyone about his true nature. On the day of the incident, authorities quickly headed to Klaus's residence, but couldn't find him. He had taken Anna's body and left a note for his girlfriend, asking her to meet him at a bar that night to discuss the situation. The police took this opportunity to wait for Klaus at the bar and arrested him upon his arrival. After his arrest, Klaus claimed he had no intention of inappropriately touching Anna. He despicably defended himself by alleging that the child tried to seduce and extort him, and fear of returning to jail drove him to end her life. He claimed Anna had threatened to tell her mother he had inappropriately touched her, a claim he insisted was false and made with the intent to extort money from him. Klaus revealed he had hidden the body in a cardboard box near a canal. When the police informed Marianne about her daughter's whereabouts and tragic demise, she was devastated. However, the trial brought further anguish. Marianne was forced to hear testimonies and descriptions about her life and Anna's, suggesting that Anna was practically raised on the streets and that such an incident was inevitable due to Marianne's negligence as a bar waitress who worked late nights and neglected her daughter. This left Marianne heartbroken and furious, particularly tormented by the possibility that Anna's killer might not receive the maximum penalty due to potential claims of mental health issues, which could allow him to avoid prison. Consequently, Marianne silently began to devise a plan to avenge her daughter's death, regardless of the consequences. During the trial, Klaus Grabowski repeatedly claimed that Anna had seduced and extorted him for money, insisting that his actions were driven by the fear of returning to jail. His defense also centered around the idea that the hormonal treatment he was undergoing significantly affected him and led to violent outbursts. Frustrated and injured by these lies, Marianne decided to buy a gun and secretly practice shooting. Every time Marianne attended the trial, her displeasure was evident, especially when she heard statements that defamed her 7-year-old daughter. At one point, she expressed clear anger, unable to bear listening to Klaus and his lawyer's fabrications. However, the trial took a dramatic turn on its third day, March 6, 1981. Marianne arrived at the courtroom later than usual, entering with an expressionless face. She walked with an upright posture, her hands in the pockets of her white coat. Unbeknownst to others, she had managed to bypass the strict security measures of the judicial establishment with a pistol in her pocket. As the judge and others in the courtroom carried on with the proceedings, Klaus, with his back to Marianne, faced the judge. At this moment, Marianne stood still, her nerves palpable. She seized the opportunity to act when Klaus stood up to give his statement. Marianne pulled out the pistol and fired 7 shots, 6 of which struck Klaus, causing him to collapse. The precision of her shots was noted by many. Marianne remained expressionless throughout, slightly moving her lips as she fired. She made no attempt to flee and did not resist when the courtroom security detained her. Marianne was heard saying, "That pig killed my daughter. He shot her in the face, but I shot him in the back. I hope he's dead." Her wish was confirmed when an officer checked Klaus and declared him dead. Upon hearing this, a look of relief crossed Marianne's face, contrasting her previous expressions. However, Marianne now faced her own trial, which would not be easy to escape. Those who witnessed the incident noted that Marianne seemed to be in a trance, struggling to comprehend her actions. The forensic psychiatrist examined her, asking her to write something to analyze her handwriting and mental state. Marianne wrote, "I did it for Anna," surrounding the sentence with 7 hearts, possibly representing each year of Anna's life. The next day, German newspapers displayed Marianne's photo, dubbing her the Avenging Mother. The case became the most well-known instance of vigilante justice in West Germany, garnering extensive media coverage. television crews from across Europe rushed to report on the case, highlighting its extraordinary and tragic nature. Marianne was quickly brought to trial for murder. During her trial, she testified that she was not fully aware of her actions, claiming she was in a trance and even had a dream where she saw Anna walking through the courtrooms. She also mentioned her mental health had deteriorated significantly following the events. Marianne then told a lie that likely worsened her standing with the judge. She claimed she had bought the gun to end her own life, but no one believed she hadn't premeditated her actions and practiced with the weapon before using it in court. Many people in Germany and around the world supported Marianne for taking matters into her own hands, as they felt the system had failed by previously freeing Klaus and authorizing his hormonal treatment without proper evaluation. They saw it as fair to set her free. However, there were also those who viewed Marianne as a criminal who had taken justice into her own hands in the worst possible way, labeling her a murderer. Others judged her for being an irresponsible mother who had given up her other 2 children for adoption and committed a cold-blooded crime that could have harmed others in the process. With all this controversy and mixed feelings, Marianne was charged with murder in a judicial process for the death of Klaus Grabowski on November 2, 1982. The prosecution later withdrew the charge, and after 28 days of negotiations, the jury reached a verdict. In March 1983, Marianne was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and illegal possession of a firearm, sentenced to 6 years in prison. 3 years later, the authorities reconsidered, believing she didn't deserve any sentence. Soon after, Marianne sold her life story for about 250,000 German marks in an exclusive to a news magazine, stating she did it to pay off the debts caused by the judicial process. Following the fall of the Berlin Wall, she returned to a now unified Germany after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. During this time, Marianne was interviewed by various media outlets, often placed in tense situations with questions comparing her to Klaus, as both were murderers. Despite this, she maintained her composure, stating she did what she did to ensure Klaus faced justice for his actions against the 7-year-old girl, even as he continued to spread lies about her in his final moments. Knowing her illness was terminal, Marianne asked a reporter to accompany her with a movie camera until her last moments. Marianne passed away at the age of 46 on September 17, 1996, from pancreatic cancer. She was buried next to her daughter Anna's grave in the Lübeck cemetery. Maria Alejandra Lafuente Casco was a charming young Mexican psychologist, well known for her love of staying fit and active. She took great care of her petite figure, delighting in her own beauty and charm. With her light, wheat-colored complexion, long black hair, full lips, and deep-set eyes, she was a sight to behold. Maria Alejandra loved spending time at the beach, basking in the sun to maintain her impeccable tan. Following in her father's footsteps, the esteemed psychologist and renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Alberto Eduardo, Maria Alejandra held a deep admiration for her father, which ultimately inspired her to pursue a career in psychology. She specialized in treating adolescents and young adults dealing with depression, anxiety, and behavioral disorders. Her practice was located on the Roma Sur neighborhood in Mexico City. As a divorcee and a mother of 2, Maria Alejandra was eager to find love again and create a new home for her family. However, her divorce had not been amicable. In fact, in 2011, she became involved in a shocking incident against her ex-husband. According to his statements, which remain anonymous as per authorities' decision, the incident occurred after their separation. He had gone to visit their children when Maria Alejandra asked him to enter the living room and sit on a strangely plastic-covered sofa. At first, He refused, but she insisted, claiming their daughter had a surprise for him. Reluctantly, he agreed to blindfold himself and take a seat. After several minutes of silence, not hearing any sounds from his daughter or Maria Alejandra, he grew suspicious. Just as he was confirming his suspicions, he felt a severe blow to his head. Struck by the fireplace poker, instantly removing his blindfold, he pleaded with his ex-wife to calm down. But she continued her assault. In a desperate attempt to escape, he realized the door was locked. With her ex-husband now fully at her mercy, Maria Alejandra grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed him in the abdomen and back. Cornered and in severe pain, he tried to wrest the knife from her grasp, only for her to bite his arm. The woman tried to inject him with a substance using a syringe, but he struggled and managed to get her off of him, eventually escaping. The couple's daughter, who had witnessed her parents violently confront each other on numerous occasions, saw everything that happened that traumatic night. In none of the previous instances of violence had the couple sought intervention from authorities. However, this time was different. The man believed that Maria Alejandra had gone too far, so he decided to report her. According to the files, the psychologist was accused by the Homicide Prosecutor's Office of the Mexico City Attorney General's Office of Attempted Homicide. Maria Alejandra was taken to jail, and the 67th criminal judge issued a pretrial detention order. Later, the charge was reclassified to attempted mitigated homicide. On June 14, 2012, she was sentenced to serve 1 year and 4 months in prison. However, Maria Alejandra and her lawyers quickly mobilized to obtain various benefits. As a result, she was released after obtaining a sentence substitution for the payment of fines, as well as conditional suspension of the sentence or compensation for material damage, a fine of 18,843 Mexican pesos, approximately $1,009 at the current exchange rate, and for moral damages compensation, 31,200 pesos, approximately $1,836. Despite obtaining these advantages, the defense lawyers were dissatisfied with the judicial resolution. They argued that Maria Alejandra had acted in self-defense, claiming that her ex-husband used to beat her. Therefore, they filed an appeal against the sentence, which was reviewed by the magistrates of the 9th Criminal Chamber. Ultimately, these magistrates determined that the woman was not criminally responsible and ordered her full release, lifting the sentence. Upon her release, Maria Alejandra returned to her psychology practice as if nothing had happened. The image she projected ultimately worked in her favor, as she presented herself as an empowered victim who had overcome gender violence. But with a new life came a new victim. Back in her practice, Maria Alejandra met Alan Carrera Cuellar, a 41-year-old Mexican businessman. The man was the son of Adrian Carrera Fuentes, a former director of the now-defunct Federal Judicial Police, who had had a long and fruitful career in law enforcement, holding chief positions in different institutions. Adrian, Alan's father, established several businesses aimed at supplying the construction sector with materials. He specialized mainly in the sale of tiles and founded a chain of stores in southern Mexico. While his commercial establishments were legitimate, Adrian had mafia connections. Consequently, he was removed from his position to face legal proceedings and was charged due to his direct ties with the Juarez Cartel, a Mexican criminal organization involved in drug trafficking and other illicit activities. This group controlled a significant percentage of drug trafficking from Mexico to the United States. The organization was led by Amado Carrillo, who died in 1997 in a Mexico City hospital after undergoing extensive plastic surgery to change his appearance. Adrian was accused of providing protection to both Carrillo and Juan Garcia, the leader of the Gulf Cartel. Garcia was on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in the 1990s until his arrest in January 1996. He was later extradited to the United States, where he was convicted on 22 counts of money laundering, drug possession, and trafficking. These events are significant due to their direct and indirect impact on Alan's life. Since Adrien was associated with such influential figures in the criminal world, it was anticipated, given the accumulated evidence against him and his own confession, that he would spend at least 20 years in prison. However, by participating in the Witness Protection Program during the investigation of the Juarez cartel by the Attorney General's Office of Mexico, he was released on July 18, 2000, to dedicate himself entirely to his businesses. Meanwhile, Alan joined the family business, managing the tile stores founded by his influential father. This role not only helped him earn a good income, but also left him with a lot of free time. He was married and had a daughter, but in early 2011, he divorced his wife, leaving him devastated, depressed, and struggling with alcoholism. That's when he decided to seek therapy and started attending psychological consultations with Alberto, Maria Alejandra's father. At the same time, his teenage daughter, affected by her parents' breakup, started attending sessions with a psychologist to learn how to cope with the consequences of their separation and to manage this traumatic process. Her father's therapist recommended this, and she ended up discussing her issues with Maria Alejandra. Alan accompanied his daughter to the clinic, and after the third session, Maria Alejandra asked the girl to introduce her to her father, claiming professional reasons. She said she wanted to talk to him to make better progress in therapy. However, this was just an excuse, as Maria Alejandra wanted to get to know Alan on a personal level. It didn't take long for them to start a romantic relationship. When the teenager found out, she was furious and stopped attending the sessions, but not before confronting Maria Alejandra about her misconduct. Maria Alejandra, assertive and intimidating, threatened to kill the young girl if she interfered with the new relationship. After a few weeks, what started as casual dates and romantic encounters turned into a formal marriage proposal from Alan. He decided to start a new life with Maria Alejandra, completely unaware of the reasons behind her separation from her ex-husband. One weekend in April 2014, Alan went to visit his family and introduced Maria Alejandra as his soon-to-be wife. They informed everyone that they would be getting married within a week, and she even mentioned that she might be pregnant. The wedding took place the following Monday, but no members of the Carrero family attended. They weren't invited under the premise that the ceremony would be very intimate. Only Maria Alejandra's father, his wife, and their children attended. Maria Alejandra, seemingly perfect, soon revealed her true nature. After the wedding, things started to change drastically. The newlyweds' relationship began to turn tumultuous, though there are not many details about what transpired between them. As Alan was a very reserved man, it is known that violence escalated in their interactions. Alan's family disapproved of his relationship with Maria Alejandra, noticing that he became more prone to anger and seemed increasingly worried. For this reason, all of Alan's loved ones preferred to keep their distance from his wife. At some point, Maria Alejandra, who had no regard for privacy, went through Alan's phone and allegedly found compromising messages that suggested he was involved with another woman. She claimed this was the final straw, stating that she was tired of enduring constant mistreatment from Alan and was unwilling to tolerate his infidelity as well. Convinced that trying to save the relationship was futile, she did not want to try therapy. She also didn't consider legally ending the relationship through a divorce, as they both had done with their previous marriages. To her, there was only one way to solve the problem: eliminate her husband. From that point on, she coldly calculated every step to execute her plan perfectly. Meanwhile, Alan seemed unaware of the extent of the conflict with Maria Alejandra and maintained his work routines and contact with his family. Despite the family's differences with his new wife, Alan remained close to his loved ones, communicating daily through WhatsApp. They respected his decisions, and although they found the marriage to be somewhat rushed, they continued to support him. Surprisingly, the family contact dynamic changed abruptly. On October 31, 2014, Alan exchanged messages with his family for the last time. Overnight, everyone lost contact with him. He didn't show up at work, at his parents' house, or at his daughter's house. Additionally, while he responded to text messages, they seemed to be written strangely. He didn't answer phone calls or send voice messages. On November 5, 2014, Maria Alejandra executed her plan with premeditation and cold blood. She waited for her husband to return home from work and gave him a glass containing a drink laced with a psychoactive drug used to treat depression and other mood disorders. The drug has sedative effects due to its composition, and it's a prescription medication that causes drowsiness and impairs movement. Once she was sure he was completely sedated, Maria Alejandra showed no mercy. She stabbed Alan in the abdomen with a sharp kitchen tool while he was defenseless, waiting for him to take his last breath. The next step was to dispose of the body. She placed it on the bedroom floor and used an electric saw to dismember his body into pieces that she could handle and store in plastic garbage bags. To facilitate transportation, she put the bags into a red suitcase. The body parts that could help identify him were placed in another bag and stored in her kitchen freezer. Once everything was in order, around 12:45 a.m., she called the security guards of the private housing estate where she lived. She asked for help to load the suitcase into her van, as recorded in the security logbook of that day. The condominium security personnel found her extremely nervous and desperate, glancing around in all directions. They asked her what was in the suitcase, and she replied that it was her father's surgical equipment, and that she needed to transport it to the hospital immediately because she was very sick, and he was going to perform emergency surgery on her. During the time she was away from her residence, she scattered the bags containing the body parts in 2 different parts of the city. Upon returning home, she changed the locks on the doors and informed the residential security guard that she was going on a trip with her husband. On November 6, 2014, Mexico City police found a human torso without upper limbs. In the afternoon, they had found other human remains, including arms and legs without hands or feet, in black plastic bags. The distance between the first and second discovery sites was considerable, explaining why Maria Alejandra took so long to return to the condominium that early morning. The remains were transferred to the Institute of Forensic Sciences, where anthropologist specialists determined that they belonged to a single person, but they were unable to identify the individual at that time. To distract Alan's relatives and prevent them from notifying the police, Maria Alejandra used her husband's mobile phone to send greetings and respond to all received messages. She temporarily succeeded in ensuring that no one suspected his tragic end, buying herself time to organize a plan to appear guilt-free, just as she had done when she attacked her first husband. Alan's siblings and daughter received WhatsApp messages in which he supposedly commented that he regretted getting married and announced that he had recently started a relationship with another woman. Other contradictory messages stated that he liked being alone, and some said he was traveling. At the same time, Alberto, Maria Alejandra's father, began calling Alan's father to inquire if they knew the whereabouts of his daughter, whom he had been searching for days without any news. Later, he called Alan's parents again to inform them that he had found Maria Alejandra and that she was admitted to the National Institute of Psychiatry, seeking treatment for depression caused by Alan's supposed infidelity. He also mentioned that she had become paranoid, thinking that the police were after her, which was another reason for her hospitalization. In the midst of this web of deception, months passed, but when December came with its special connotation of family unity, Alan's relatives decided to go to his house to see him. Once again, Maria Alejandra was a step ahead. She notified them that they would not be at the location, as they had decided to take a vacation. This story did not make sense to them at all, especially after Alberto's call confirming that she was in the city and undergoing psychiatric treatment. So when the alarmed family went to the police and filed a missing person report for Alan, it only took a few days for the authorities to notice that the report matched the recently found remains. The prosecutors cross-referenced information with staff from the Center for Missing and Absent Persons. These conversations helped them progress in achieving a full identification of the victim. They compared the characteristics of the human remains with the reports of missing persons with similar physical traits. Finally, Alan's body was identified by his relatives. The officers then decided to inspect the couple's house, and upon arrival, they found Maria Alejandra. The detectives immediately took her to the police station and secured a search warrant. Once obtained, they searched the house for evidence and finally found Alan's head, feet, and hands, as well as an electric saw. The investigators found blood traces in one of the rooms and in the bathroom using luminal tests. They also noticed that the surface of the mattress and a piece of the carpet had been cut out to erase evidence of fluids. It was later determined that Maria Alejandra had used these items to support Alan's body parts. Initially, she was questioned as a witness, but fell into constant and obvious contradictions, becoming the main person of interest in the case. The investigation soon determined that she was the one sending messages from her husband's cell phone to make his family believe he was alive and not report his disappearance. Maria Alejandra claimed she knew nothing about Alan, that she had not seen him for several days, and that they barely communicated through text messages. Taking advantage of her background as a psychologist and trying to prove her innocence, she showed an admission form to a psychiatric clinic dated during the days when her husband disappeared. Initially, Maria Alejandra denied all responsibility, but Alan's body spoke for itself, and the forensic experts were able to perfectly reconstruct the events. From their analysis, the experts noted in the autopsy protocol that a wound was visible on the torso, caused by a sharp instrument that had penetrated the abdomen and was classified as lethal. With all the evidence that the authorities gathered at the couple's house, as well as at the sites where they found his remains, the investigators were able to establish Maria Alejandra's connection to her husband's cruel death. The detectives had testimonies placing her at the scene of the time of the events, and this was supported by the building's security log, which detailed the specific times she left and entered. Plus, the issue of the heavy suitcase that they helped her load into her vehicle. In addition, statements from Alan's daughter and sister revealed that the psychologist had threatened the young girl with taking her life if she opposed the relationship with her father. Although Maria Alejandra attempted to evade responsibility by admitting herself to a psychiatric center, forensic studies confirmed that she did not suffer from any mental illness. Finally cornered by the evidence, Maria Alejandra confessed to the fatal assault against her husband and admitted that she took him by surprise. However, she justified her actions by stating she was tired of the domestic violence she was experiencing. On December 10, 2014, the court issued a formal prison order for Maria Alejandra for the crime of homicide. From that moment on, information began to emerge that could implicate the woman in other fatal violent events. For instance, it was said that Maria Alejandra might have committed another serious crime against people in 2012. All this leads to suspicions that the accused might have had help from her father, who would be an accomplice in covering for her and diverting public opinion. Over the years, he allegedly stripped the man of some of his assets, according to Mexican media. Thus, there are suspicions that, in reality, the La Fuente father and daughter were highly dangerous criminals. However, justice did not establish any decisive line of investigation in this regard. After an 8-year wait, on Monday, September 5, 2022, The General Prosecutor's Office of the Capital announced the sentence. For the crimes of qualified homicide and disrespect to corpses or human remains, Maria Alejandra Lafuente Casco was sentenced to 46 years and 6 months in prison, an unprecedented punishment in modern Mexican justice. After the firm conviction, she has no right to review the sentence or to alternative measures that relieve the prison sentence. She was also ordered to pay for the damage and funeral costs, and she lost her political rights. Maria Alejandra Lafuente was a calculating woman who seems to have taken advantage of her father's influence and protection to act freely and proceed against the men who, in some way, tried to save her from punishment for the assault she committed against her first husband, using an argument that portrayed her as a mistreated lady, probably making use of her great manipulation skills. Then, just 3 years later, she acted again, this time against her second husband. Acting with incredible cold blood, she planned the bloody end and even feigned insanity to once again avoid being held responsible for her actions. But this time, she had gone too far. Nothing could save her from being harshly sentenced by justice. Elliot Rodger was born on July 24, 1991, in London, England. His parents were Peter Rodger and Lee Chin Rodger, both very young at the time of conceiving the child, and while growing their professional careers, Peter was dedicated to photography, dreamed of becoming a renowned filmmaker in Hollywood. Lee Chin was a young woman from Malaysia who had come to the United Kingdom to work as a nurse on film sets. Thanks to her job, she had the necessary contacts to fantasize about the idea of moving the family to the United States, where big dreams come true. George Lucas, no less, was a close friend of Lee Chin. In the years following after Elliot's birth, the family prepared for the big move, and after the arrival of their fourth member, Georgia, in 1996, they finally embarked on the journey that changed their lives. That year, the four of them took their belongings and settled in California, close to movie stars and huge recording studios. A new chapter in the life of the Rodgers began. However, not everyone was pleased with this change. For the first time, sadness appeared within Elliot. For him, the happy days had been left behind in London. But after a brief period of adaptation, he was ready to become the happy child he once was. When it was time to start at his new school, his limited social skills became evident. Elliot was extremely shy and rarely had the courage to approach other children, to start a conversation or join a game. In these situations, it was his mother who intervened and invited some classmates over to play at the house. Then, everything would go normally, and Elliot seemed to integrate easily. Although there were numerous moves, after a while, the Rodgers found their place and began to form bonds in the country they had arrived in. The adults had their friends, their dream jobs. Elliot was doing well in school. Everything seemed to be going as planned. But the dream was short-lived. By the time Elliot turned 7, the fights between Peter and Lee Chin became more frequent. The situation became unbearable, and after a few months, the couple decided to separate. This event significantly affected Elliot's emotions and behavior. The child began to feel resentment towards his father, especially when, shortly after, he introduced him to his new girlfriend. He couldn't believe what he was doing to his mother. He refused to go to his father's house because he was hardly ever there, and he had to spend time with his father's new girlfriend, whom Elliot felt was trying to impose rules as if she had authority over him. But other, more important issues were on his mind, and soon his parents' breakup became a secondary concern. What really obsessed him was figuring out how to make friends and be seen as a popular kid. He observed from a distance the behavior of the classmates he admired, wanting to emulate their appearance so others would notice him. Until that point, he had felt invisible everywhere except at home. At home, his mother indulged all his wishes and whims, but outside, he felt that no one acknowledged his existence. He did everything within his power to change this, seeing that his father, a good and successful man, had quickly found a new woman. Elliot concluded that this was the way to stand out among people and eventually become a great seducer. He asked his parents for permission to dye his hair blonde, changed his outfits to urban clothes, like those worn by skaters, bought a skateboard, and started practicing. His plan seemed to be working. For the first time, he felt he could find a group of friends on his own, without the need to talk too much. But at the same time, he was not so good with physical skills. There was always someone better than him. This discovery filled him with hatred. This was the first time he began to experience envy and jealousy. Others seemed to fit perfectly into the world, but for him, it seemed an impossible task to accomplish. Unfortunately, this thought began to completely take over his mind, plunging him into a vicious cycle of resentment. By the time he reached adolescence, his obsession took another turn. The idea of getting a girlfriend and losing his virginity began to occupy his head all day. He knew that day would come. Each day, his group of friends demanded him to do something he didn't want to do. He himself claimed that he was desperate to catch the attention of women, to receive the love that had been denied to him so far, to lose the virginity that made him look as a loser. Time kept passing, and he was still unable to achieve his goal. He couldn't understand why women didn't notice him, why they didn't choose him and preferred to go out with unoriginal boys, only dating good-looking guys whom he considered stereotypes. After constant frustrations, which accumulated from failed attempts to relate to other people, he immersed himself in the world of video games. There, he found an escape from the harsh reality he faced daily. He distanced himself from the few friends he had managed to make with the help of his mother and fully delved into the parallel universe of role-playing games, losing interest in everything else. At school, they began to bully him for being the quiet and calm boy, and also mocked him for his fear of talking to women. When the situation became unbearable, his parents decided to change his school. However, this measure turned out to be even worse, as he was sent to a school with a larger number of students than the previous one, which caused him overwhelming anxiety. At that establishment, he also suffered bullying from his classmates. He then begged his parents not to send him back to that place. Complying with his request, they decided to send him to a smaller part-time institution. Elliot felt more comfortable there, but still, none of his classmates were to his liking. The hatred for people was already entrenched in him. He saw himself as superior to others, who were incapable of noticing him. For this reason, he believed he was doomed to a lonely and miserable life, while other boys his age lived their lives fully, partying, having intimate relationships, and socializing with friends. The envy and jealousy he had begun to feel during his childhood took over his body, filling him with fury and hatred towards all humanity. These thoughts led to several episodes of crying where he expressed being fed up with his life. The experiences that had led him to constant frustration and the new family his father had formed eventually plunged him into a deep depression. Although he refused to leave his room, his parents decided to take him to a psychiatrist. The professional prescribed medication, but Elliot refused to take it, insisting he was not sick. Nevertheless, the first signs that something was not right began to appear. When it was time to go to university, his parents thought it would be a good idea for Elliot to live on the campus of the University of California. Perhaps being away from his family, the boy would find a way to relate to people his age without the intervention of his mother or any other adult. However, once again, the plan did not turn out as expected. Elliot lived with other classmates, but he didn't even engage in conversation with them. He found it impossible to share his space with others. Everything seemed to be an attack on him. Moreover, reality hit him hard again. The city where he lived was full of young people having fun day and night, walking hand in hand with their partners, and he couldn't even approach anyone. He then thought that, although he hated them, the only option to get a girlfriend was to become like one of them. He took advantage of his parents' good economic position to build a personality based on wearing designer clothes, driving a high-end car, and flaunting the money he had to be seen as a sophisticated, cultured, and fascinating man. To do that, he had to become rich, and the easiest way to do it was by betting on lottery tickets. He invested the money his parents sent him, learned gaming strategies, and dedicated his time to achieving his goal. But once again, his plan did not come to fruition. It was impossible for him to contain the rage he felt seeing others have the life he desired and believed he deserved. He then began to frequent websites to learn how to seduce women. By clicking on some alternative links, he arrived at a portal where hundreds of men in the same situation shared their frustration and blamed women for their discomfort. However, he saw these men as losers and did not feel he belonged to that category either. His insistence on fulfilling his win seemed to have no end. On one occasion, learning about a party organized at one of the fraternities, he took the courage to go, even though he had not been invited. Beforehand, he drank vodka in his university room and then went to the place. When he entered the house, he saw people talking among themselves. But once again, they did not notice his presence. He drank a few more glasses there, hoping someone would approach him. Then he noticed an Asian boy having fun, and anger overwhelmed him. He ran towards him and started shouting and insulting him. How was it possible that this Asian boy had friends, and he did not? People mocked him because he was drunk and did not know what he was saying. Then, by his own will, he left that room, went to a balcony, sat down, and watched everyone in solitude, hating them with all his might. Soon, the refuge he had found began to fill with boys and girls. Fury returned, and he started to insult the women, trying to push them off the balcony. However, the boys accompanying them reacted in time, and it was he himself who ended up falling. Injured from the fall, he left the place completely lost in his fury. The next day, he called his father to accompany him to a hospital due to the poor condition of his leg. He invented a story in which he was the victim. This was his breaking point. All the discomfort he had been dragging for years had to be returned to the world and humanity, which had rejected him time and again. He decided he had to take control of the situation. The only way out was revenge. This was how his macabre fantasy took shape and turned into a plan to execute, a plan he called the Day of Retribution. Eli had prepared for months for the day he would finally end his miserable existence. During his time at the university, he had managed to save the money his parents sent him for living expenses to buy weapons that would help him carry out his revenge against humanity. He learned to use them, set a date for the event, and opened a YouTube channel where days before the attack he uploaded videos detailing what he intended to do. He made sure to narrate his day-to-day life and the hatred he felt when he saw couples holding hands or kissing in front of him. He claimed it was a crime that some had that opportunity when he wasn't even looked at. It was an injustice perpetrated by a twisted world and humanity. In the videos, he also showed how he drove around in his luxurious car, and at every corner, he found a party of young people having fun, many girls interacting with boys, and how he insulted and resented them. In his original plan, he included the murder of his stepmother and his younger brother for stealing the life he deserved. The date for this terrible event was initially April 26, 2014, as his father would be out of town. However, a change in Peter's schedule forced Iliad to postpone it for another month. Meanwhile, one of the threatening videos Elliot had uploaded to his blog reached his mother. Concerned about what she had just seen, she alerted the police authorities. 2 officers showed up at the door of the apartment where Elliot lived. The young manipulator appeared calm and friendly enough to convince them that he was fine and would not harm himself or anyone else, considering the possibility of ruining everything he had planned up to that point. Elliot decided to expedite his plan on May 23, 2014. He uploaded his last video, titled The Day of Retribution, and simultaneously sent an email to a dozen acquaintances, including his parents, with a 141-page autobiographical manuscript entitled My Twisted World. In it, he explained the reasons for his hatred towards humanity and justified the horrible actions he was about to commit. His targets were women who chose other men and those men who had the fortune of living the life he believed he deserved. Even in his apartment, he stabbed to death 2 of his roommates and a friend who was visiting them while they were sleeping. He then got into his car and drove to a fraternity, where, according to him, the most beautiful women who had rejected him throughout his life were located. He knocked persistently on the door, but no one opened. He then fired his weapon at a group of girls passing by. 3 of them died instantly, while 1 was injured but survived. Elliot got back into his car and drove through the streets of the city, bringing terror to each person unfortunate enough to cross his path. Passing by a store, he fired his gun numerous times from his car without getting out. Suddenly, the police managed to locate the loose murderer they had been searching for minutes. They began to pursue him, exchanging gunfire. Elliot, out of control, ran over people in his attempt to escape until he was shot in the hip, causing him to crash into a light post. Then, in the immense silence that finally enveloped the terrified city, a final explosion was heard, coming from the interior of the vehicle Elliot was driving. When the officers approached, they found him dead with a head wound. In total, 7 people perished that fateful night, including Elliot Rodger. After the desperation and fear that ran through the blood of the witnesses of the tragic event came desolation. No one could believe what had happened on May 23, 2014. The families of the victims were inconsolable at the fatal end of their loved ones. Even his parents could not comprehend the terrible, drastic decision their son had made. Peter Rodger felt the need to publicly apologize to the relatives, and also assured that they had not been able to see how sick Elliot was, as he had been clever enough to hide most of the thoughts tormenting his mind. Although they were aware of his obsession with getting a girlfriend, he had never expressed the hatred he felt for all humanity. Peter assured that he would live tormented for the rest of his days, knowing that his son took the lives of innocent people due to severe disorders that had not been detected in time. Although they were aware of his obsession with getting a girlfriend, he had never expressed the hatred he felt for all humanity. Peter assured that he would live tormented for the rest of his days, knowing that his son took the lives of innocent people due to severe disorders that had not been detected in time. In this account, Rodger recounted that as soon as his ex-wife received the email containing the manuscript, she called him desperately to warn him that something bad was about to happen. They believed Elliot was going to take his own life. They then drove to meet him and convince him not to do anything rash. But by the time they arrived at the place, the attack had already started, and the news from the police was the death of their son and 6 other people. In an attempt to remedy what Elliot caused, Elliot's parents dedicated their days to joining the fight for improvements in the health system and against gun possession. The case of Elliot Rodger demonstrated that once again, an entire system failed to protect people's integrity. When officers arrived at his apartment, they discovered his collection of knives and other sharp objects, as well as his writings and books about mass murderers. Mental health professionals were also unable to recognize that they were dealing with a severe narcissist, an antisocial person lacking empathy, who endangered his life and others, but they managed to deduce it after his act of revenge. What is even more striking is that while for some, Elliot Rodger was a heartless murderer, for others, he represented someone who did justice for people who feel invisible. Nicola Edgington was a woman deemed as exceptionally dangerous after she assaulted 2 people with a knife. She had previously killed her own mother and was living freely in the community when she committed these chilling new attacks. The day turned nightmarish when Edgington, after taking a bus, randomly targeted 2 individuals on their way to work. Clark, an artist, narrowly escaped death by catching the knife's blade and fending Edgington off. But the horror didn't end there. Edgington, undeterred, struck Hodkin, a law firm accounts clerk, with such force that she almost decapitated her. Nicola Edgington was born in Britain on September 9, 1980, the eldest of 3 children to Marion and Harry Edgington. Her younger siblings are Tom, 2 years her junior, and Sarah, who was 5 years younger. Not much is known about Nicola's early years, except that her father Harry was a respected foreign correspondent for the British newspaper Daily Mail and often worked from home. Her mother Marion was known for her warm and outgoing personality, making her quite popular in their community. But her brother Tom says Nicola was always quite the troublemaker. He described her as a challenging child whose unruly and confrontational behavior often caused family turmoil and strained her parents' relationship. Eventually, her parents separated. Harry moved to France but stayed in touch with the children. Nicola's troubles weren't confined to home. She was also a constant source of conflict at school. As a result, other parents didn't want their children associating with her, viewing her as a bad influence. At home, Nicola frequently clashed with her mother, who took her to psychologists multiple times, trying to find a reason for her inappropriate behavior. Despite these visits, the professionals always concluded that Nicola was perfectly normal. Her brother later remarked that Nicola was good at pretending to be sane. Nicola's behavior became even more challenging during her preteen years. By the age of 11, she had become completely uncontrollable and would disappear from home for days at a time. In one instance, driven to desperation by her constant escapades, her mother Marion hid all her shoes. Unperturbed, Nicola simply took a pair of her brother's shoes and left anyway. Marion frequently had to call the police to locate her daughter Nicola. It's not clear whether she truly needed assistance or was just causing trouble, but Nicola did once call social services to be moved to a care facility, accusing her mother of improper conduct. Her call led to her being taken away for her safety, but she was sent back home after a few weeks because she was seen as a threat to other children at the facility. Later, Marion sold their home and moved to a remote cabin in East Sussex, hoping for anonymity and a fresh start. She was trying to keep her 12-year-old daughter away from bad influences, including friends with whom Nicola had started drinking, smoking, and staying out late. In this new place, Nicola was enrolled in a local school, while her siblings were sent to a boarding school. This move, Marion hoped, would allow her to better manage Nicola and keep the younger children safe. Tom, her brother, later expressed his satisfaction with the boarding school, enjoying the company of peers from stable families and dreading weekends at home due to Nicola's disruptive influence. Meanwhile, Marion continued struggling with Nicola, who left school for good at 15, escalating tensions and even violence at home, once assaulting her mother with a home telephone, leading to police intervention and warnings against such behavior. Nicola eventually moved out of the family home into an apartment in Brighton, arranged by her father. At 17, Nicola fell pregnant and was expecting twins, but the pregnancy was tragically cut short by a violent act from her boyfriend. 2 years later, she got pregnant again by a drug dealer. This baby was born prematurely, but survived. Nicola returned home and her mother helped care for the fragile newborn. Then Nicola began working various jobs, including as a receptionist, salesperson, and pole dancer in nightclubs, where she often used drugs and experienced 2 overdoses. She met her future husband in a club with whom she had her second child. His identity remains undisclosed, but according to Tom, this marriage brought stability to Nicola's life, as her Jamaican husband cherished both children and ensured Nicola took her prescribed medication for behavioral management. However, the stability was short-lived as Nicola stopped her medication, joining an evangelical church, believing faith rather than medicine could control her behavior. Unfortunately, this did not lead to the hoped-for miracle. Instead, Nicola developed a religious delusion, convinced she was surrounded by demons. Apparently, due to immigration issues, Nicola's husband had to return to Jamaica, taking both children with him. However, Nicola later followed him, not exactly to reunite the family. She went to Jamaica and then back to her own country, taking her first child with her, even against her husband's wishes. He was very worried about her mental state. Upon her return to Britain, Nicola's situation didn't get any better, and Marion was deeply concerned for the little one's safety because Nicola was having violent and unstable episodes. Living in constant stress from her daughter's outbursts and fearing for her grandson's safety, Marion made a tough decision to protect him. So, when the boy was 5 years old, she entrusted him to social services, and he eventually ended up living in Jamaica with his stepfather. Nicola, who previously had a council-funded apartment because of her children, lost this benefit when they were no longer with her. She had to move back in with her mother, who, despite being scared of her, couldn't leave her daughter homeless. For Marion, the troubles only seemed to increase. Her relationship with Nicola remained fraught, and Nicola's violent behavior continued. Things escalated to the point where, in 2005, Nicola received a legal warning for causing damage to a neighbor's property, where she also allegedly threatened someone with a knife. At that time, a psychiatrist evaluated her and claimed there was no evidence of mental illness, but it wouldn't be long before events suggested otherwise. On November 4th, 2005, Tom and Sarah visited their mother, marking the first time in a long while that the 3 siblings were together at their maternal home. It was an awkward reunion, so to lighten the mood, Tom invited Nicola to a pub. This move also allowed Sarah to have some peaceful time with their mother. At the first pub, Tom tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but Nicola seemed distracted, focusing on writing in a notebook. They then moved to another venue, where Tom felt relieved as Nicola became more talkative, even mentioning her plans to move back to Jamaica. However, this calm was short-lived, as Nicola was soon thrown out for starting a fight with the owner of the venue. Tom chose to stay and called his mother and sister to join him, and they agreed. However, when they arrived, Marion couldn't find parking, so she dropped Sarah off at the venue and returned home. After a while, Tom and Sarah also decided to head back to their mother's house. Upon entering, Tom immediately noticed something about the guest room's foldable bed. Tom couldn't fully grasp what he was seeing at first. It looked like a pile of clothes with 2 legs sticking out. He thought maybe Marion had invited someone over to stay. Still uncertain about what he was seeing, he called for his sister. Sarah, less cautious, strode into the room and immediately started screaming at Tom not to enter and to urgently call the police. The legs Tom had seen belonged to their 60-year-old mother, Marion, who was lifeless and had several stab wounds. Nicola was nowhere to be found, but for the siblings it was clear she was responsible for their mother's tragic end. Later, Tom found a notebook in the house with a list titled "Condemned People," written by Nicola. At the top of the list was their mother Marion's name, crossed out with Tom's name below it. Though no official source was mentioned, some media reported that the argument between mother and daughter might have started over Nicola's accusation that Marion had estranged her from her son and allegedly removed her from the will. When the authorities arrived at the family home, investigators began collecting evidence while forensic personnel took care of Marion's body, which had 9 stab and puncture wounds inflicted with a kitchen utensil. Meanwhile, the police launched a search for Nicola, who was not at the house. Sarah made several TV appearances, pleading for Nicola to turn herself in. Almost 13 weeks later, on November 21, 2005, Nicola was located on a public transport unit in London. Upon her arrest, she immediately blamed Tom for the fatal attack on their mother. Nicola was then subjected to a psychiatric evaluation at the station, where specialists declared her to be in an actively psychotic state. Subsequently, she was initially taken to prison and later, in February 2006, transferred to a facility for individuals who had committed crimes and suffered from mental health issues. Upon her arrival, specialists deemed Nicola unfit to stand trial, putting the legal proceedings on hold until a new professional assessment could determine her ability to understand her situation and actively participate in the judicial process. This milestone was reached in October 2006 when Nicola faced trial for her mother's death. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The psychiatric report presented at the trial stated that at the time of the incident, she was suffering from an acute psychotic episode, compounded by her pre-existing and persistent emotionally unstable personality traits. The mental health expert attending her recommended a prolonged stay in a secure hospital for further risk assessment and long-term rehabilitation. The judge of the case sentenced Nicola to an indefinite detention in psychiatric care at the Braxton Center. Following this decision, her siblings, Tom and Sarah, expressed relief that Nicola was finally in a place where she could not harm anyone else and receive the desperately needed help. From then on, Nicola would be treated with antipsychotic and mood-stabilizing medication. During this time, Nicola disclosed that her father had abused her in early childhood, a claim that was never confirmed and always denied by Harry. Nonetheless, Nicola consistently raised concerns among the staff attending to her. She exhibited disruptive, abusive, and rude behavior, staunchly refusing to acknowledge the crime she committed against her mother. She was obsessed with progressing quickly through treatment with the sole aim of being discharged, causing numerous challenges for the medical staff managing her case. The staff responsible for Nicola were constantly on high alert due to her interactions with male patients at the mental health center. Despite concerns, by mid-2007, Nicola was allowed supervised outings, which only raised alarms due to her deemed inappropriate behavior in the community. In November 2007, Nicola was moved within the facility to a unit allowing more independent living, not because of improved condition, but to free up a bed. In her new setting, Nicola's behavior continued to worry staff as she started a new relationship with another male patient, and her mood fluctuated with medication adjustments. Yet, on September 29, 2009, 3 years after being incarcerated for the heinous crime against her mother, controversial decisions were made about her care. After meetings, Nicola was conditionally discharged to a subsidized apartment. Nicola expressed concern about being alone at night in the new place, but the assessment team felt 24-hour supervision was unnecessary, devising a contingency plan for emergency assistance. For 2 years, she lived in a facility, designed to help adults with mental health issues live independently. With just an intercom system for security, Nicola shared the residence with 3 other tenants in separate apartments. During this time, Nicola received regular visits from her psychiatrist and social worker, along with clinic appointments. She was permitted to visit her children and husband in Jamaica twice, where her husband noted her aggressive behavior, which she denied. By 2011, at 31, Nicola planned to leave the facility, with supervisors believing she needed minimal support. However, the reality was different. Nicola was out of control, having relationships with at least 2 men, one being a co-resident, breaching the house rules and showing her disregard for regulations. In March 2011, suspecting she was pregnant by one of these men, Nicola's psychiatrist advised stopping her mood-stabilizing medication for the baby's sake. After a miscarriage, she did not resume her antipsychotic medication. Around the same time, Nicola claimed to have received abusive messages from a gym employee she might have had a relationship with. Records vary, but between September and October 2011, Nicola messaged her brother Tom via a social network, seeking help and mentioning her miscarriage, missing their mother, and lamenting that no one cared for her like Marion did. She ended her message with, "I love you," giving Tom her phone number, urging him to keep their conversation from their father. Tom's response was harsh. He reminded her of the crime she committed against their mother and expressed relief over her miscarriage, suggesting that people like her should be sterilized. He concluded by telling her to end her own life. Following this, Tom contacted Nicola's mental health team, requesting a reassessment, though it is unclear if this was acted upon. After receiving Tom's harsh response, Nicola appeared to be in crisis, contacting the police multiple times and even showing up at their station in person. Each time, she told a different story. Once she claimed someone was threatening her life. Another time, she alleged that 2 drug addicts had invaded her apartment and refused to leave, possibly stealing from her. Initially, the police responded but found no evidence of her claims and gradually paid less attention to her reports. Nicola couldn't seek help from her support worker because it was closed on weekends. She turned again to the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, a controversial institution she had attended before attacking her mother, but this didn't seem to provide the support she needed. Things took a more dramatic and dark turn on Monday, October 10th, 2011. Early at 3 a.m., Nicola took a taxi and asked to be taken to hospital. Upon arrival, she claimed the hospital was closed and decided to leave, even though the taxi driver saw that the hospital was open. He noticed Nicola had her head down and was drooling. The driver took her back to the taxi service office, where an argument ensued over Nicola's inability to pay the fare. She was trembling and distressed, repeatedly stating she needed to be admitted. Around 4:30 a.m., the police were called, and a patrol picked her up from the taxi service office and took her to Queen Elizabeth Hospital. There, Nicola said she didn't feel safe and wanted to leave. The officers got her inside before leaving the scene. Nicola tried to call her community psychiatric nurse, who was off sick, and texted her social worker to confirm a scheduled meeting for that day. She also attempted to contact the Braxton Center without success. Shortly after, Nicola asked the Queen Elizabeth receptionist if she needed to kill someone to get attention and mentioned she was hearing voices. The receptionist asked for her patience. Nicola then called the emergency number, stating she felt like she did when she had previously killed someone. The dispatcher promised to send officers, but the police decided not to go. Nicola called the emergency line again 20 minutes later, claiming she was a criminal and wanted to be arrested before she hurt someone. The police deemed it unnecessary to respond. Nicola made 2 more emergency calls, repeating that she was a dangerous schizophrenic and felt like she did when she killed her mother. The police didn't go, opting to call the hospital instead, where staff assured them Nicola was under control. At 5:30 a.m., a mental health nurse assessed her. Nicola said she hadn't slept for weeks and needed to be admitted. The nurse told her to wait for some paperwork. An hour later, security escorted Nicola to the psychiatric unit of the hospital. At 6:40 a.m., a psychiatrist greeted her, but it seemed to be a shift change and she wasn't immediately assessed. Just after 7 a.m., Nicola pushed through a supposedly secure but faulty door and left the hospital undetected. Shortly after Nicola's escape, the doctor noticed her absence and alerted the police, who then conducted a background check and realized Nicola had a psychiatric history and had been convicted for the murder of her mother. By then, it was too late. Nicola was already out of control. Security cameras later traced Nicola's movements. She took 2 buses and arrived in the city center at 8:25 a.m. She then went to a supermarket where she either bought or stole a large 30-centimeter kitchen knife. The store's cameras captured her heading towards the women's restroom with the knife in a bag and later leaving without the bag, having concealed the knife in her clothing. At 8:29 a.m., at a bus stop, Nicola encountered 22-year-old Carrie Clark, who was listening to music and rolling a cigarette. Nicola suddenly attacked her, screaming and stabbing with the hidden knife. Carrie managed to grab the knife blade with her hands, preventing it from reaching her chest, and kicked Nicola away, questioning her sanity. Nicola oddly claimed she wasn't crazy and demanded her weapon back, which Carrie refused, leading Nicola to walk away. This, however, wasn't the end. As witnesses rushed to aid Carrie, who had severe cuts on her hands, Nicola entered a butcher's shop and stole another knife. She then approached another bus stop where 58-year-old Sally Hodkin was waiting. Without warning, Nicola savagely attacked Sally, targeting her neck and fatally wounding her. Nicola then fled the scene. Security footage showed her running away and entering a store to hide. The situation, already dire, could have worsened, but police were already in the area due to the first attack. A man seen following Nicola in the footage directed the officers to her hiding spot. By 9:40 a.m., police had apprehended Nicola behind the store. She was calm during the arrest and didn't resist. Nicola was taken back to the psychiatric hospital to manage her crisis, and it was clear she would need significant time before being fit to stand trial for these crimes. While investigators processed the crime scenes and handled Sally's body, the shocking news of the attack spread, causing public dismay at the violence against innocent people. Sally, described as a devoted mother and loving grandmother awaiting 2 more grandchildren, would tragically never meet them. The legal proceedings to determine Nicola's fate started to move forward by the end of 2012 and into 2013, with her pleading not guilty to murder and attempted murder charges. The prosecution argued that Nicola suffered from a borderline personality disorder and had acted deliberately on that tragic day. In contrast, the defense claimed she was schizophrenic and had diminished responsibility due to her mental health issues. During the trial, the jury and attendees heard from Carrie Clark, who detailed the harrowing experience of Nicola's attack, describing the physical and mental scars it left, including the loss of her sense of safety in public. The prosecution also presented the gruesome details of Sally's murder, highlighting the severity of the neck wounds that led to her almost instant death. Testimonies included the senior medical officer at the mental health unit at the time, who recounted contacting the police immediately after Nicola's escape to ensure her swift return to the hospital, despite not initially perceiving her as an emergency threat. Nursing staff admitted that Nicola escaped through a faulty door supposed to be locked, contradicting their initial statements that they tried to prevent her escape. a claim disproved by security footage. A forensic psychiatrist testified for the prosecution, challenging the diagnosis of Nicola's mental condition, asserting her actions were deliberate and not of someone unaware of their actions. The defense maintained Nicola's mental unaccountability, recounting her late 2011 religious delusions, including her involvement with a non-traditional church linked to the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, known for exorcism rumors. Nicola reportedly believed in a demon guarding God's throne, represented on earth by the police, and had apocalyptic visions excluding her from salvation. The defense argued that Nicola's paranoid schizophrenia and other mental health issues meant she had diminished responsibility at the time of the attacks. After hearing from all parties and witnesses and examining the documentary evidence, the jury retired to deliberate in early February 2013. They returned after 5 hours and 24 minutes, finding Nicola guilty of the charges against her. Following the verdict, Sally's family, who had stoically endured hearing about the brutal attack that led to her death during the trial, released a statement honoring Sally and questioning why Nicola had been released so soon after killing her own mother. They described Sally as a loving, attentive person, a fantastic mother and grandmother, and an unparalleled friend. They expressed their daily remembrance of her and the deep miss felt by everyone who knew her, asserting that Nicola should never be released to ensure public safety. The guilty verdict meant Nicola faced a life sentence, with the judge's decision pending on the minimum term before parole eligibility. In March, the judge determined Nicola must serve at least 37 years in prison, meaning she would be nearly 70 years old before potential release. Describing Nicola as manipulative and exceptionally dangerous, the judge emphasized her responsibility for the heinous acts committed. Tom, Nicola's brother, also publicly criticized her quick release after killing their mother, expressing disbelief over her freedom to harm again and stressing the need to prevent such occurrences. He empathized with the victims, noting the trauma of losing their mother and suggesting greater agony for Sally's family, given the preventability of the crime. Tom disclosed that their mother had feared Nicola might end her life, yet felt responsible for her care. Following the tragic events, detailed case analyses concluded the entire system bore responsibility for the tragedy. The police failure to conduct appropriate checks on Nicola on the day of the incident, stating that a simple online system review would have revealed her dangerousness, given her prior conviction for murdering her mother. In November 2013, the Court of Appeal dismissed an attempt by Nicola's lawyers to overturn her sentence. Subsequent official investigations and an independent report concluded that Nicola's deadly actions resulted from a series of health and security service failures. Notably, the only reported penalties were the firings of nurses who initially lied about trying to prevent Nicola's escape from the psychiatric area. Interestingly, in September 2023, Nicola's case was sent back to the appeals court, prompted by concerns that jurors might have been misled about her mental health. On a cold evening in November 2021, Bobby Ann McLeod, a young woman from Plymouth, England, was waiting alone at a bus stop, intending to catch a bus to the city center to meet her friends. Dressed for a night out, she stood by the roadside, unaware of the fate that awaited her. As the minutes ticked by, the expected bus came and went, but Bobby Ann was nowhere to be found. Bobby Ann McLeod was born in 2003 in Plymouth, a lively coastal town in the southwest of England. She grew up there with her parents, Donna and Adrian McLeod, and her older brother Lee. The McLeods were a tight-knit family, always making an effort to show each family member their personal worth and importance to the family harmony. Besides the love they shared, the parents instilled strong values in their children like responsibility and respect. This probably explains why there was no competition between the siblings for their parents' affection and attention. This situation helped Bobby Ann and Lee forge a real sibling bond, without the usual rivalry for the spotlight at home. This doesn't mean they were angels or never fought. They had their typical sibling squabbles, but their affection for each other was clear to those around them. Bobby Ann and Lee were lucky to live in Plymouth, a place with a rich history dating back centuries, known for its monumental buildings and stunning seafront that often impress visitors. Surrounded by such a positive environment, Bobby Ann thrived, becoming a popular and cheerful person, always with a bright smile on her face. People who knew her from high school described her as a pretty girl with fair skin, long hair, not very tall, and with a delicate demeanor. Her kindness, loyalty, and willingness to help others made her a great friend to many. Like many teenagers, Bobby Ann was drawn to the rebelliousness of alternative rock and its provocative lyrics. She listened to artists and bands like Pink Floyd, Nirvana, Queen, and even the controversial rapper Eminem. Despite the loud music that challenged the norms, Bobby Ann remained the sweet girl everyone knew. She loved watching Disney movies, with Lilo and Stitch being her favorite, fascinated by the blue alien, her favorite color. At school, she was known for her artistic talent and creativity. She was always motivated and clear about what she wanted in life. One of her goals was to graduate from high school, and upon achieving that, she aimed for higher education. She entered university aspiring to become an interior designer. Around this time, she also experienced young love, starting a relationship with a local boy a year younger than her. They made a cute couple, got along well, and shared many friends. Donna and Adrian, as parents, and Lee, as the older brother, approved of the relationship, seeing that the young couple didn't neglect their responsibilities because of love. In fact, since they were all busy with studies during the week, they made sure to plan time together on weekends. So, on Saturday, November 20th, 2021, nobody at the McLeod's home was surprised when Bobby Ann said she would go out with her boyfriend, keeping up with their routine of nurturing their romance. They had plans to meet some friends at 8 p.m. in the city center. She had to leave home well in advance to account for the travel distance and the need to catch a bus. It was around 5:45 p.m. when the young girl bid her father goodbye, told him she loved him, promised to be back at the agreed time, and left for the bus stop. She had a 4-minute walk to the nearest bus stop at the end of her street, a route she was familiar with. Between 6:05 and 6:15 p.m., some passers-by spotted her standing at the stop, looking up and down the street waiting for the bus. Like any girl her age, while waiting, she used her mobile phone and checked her social media. She took a selfie and posted it on her story, mentioning how cold she was feeling. At the same time, Cody Ackland, a promising musician from Plymouth aged 24, was in the area. Little is known about Cody's early life, other than he was the son of David and Helen Ackland, born in June 1997 in Germany, where his father, a former military man, was stationed. After his parents divorced during his childhood, he lived with his mother in Plymouth, close to the bus stop where Bobby Ann was waiting. Although Cody attended the same high school as Bobby Ann, their 6-year age difference meant they likely never met there. After school, he worked various jobs, but music was his passion, leading him to become an indie rock band's lead guitarist and songwriter. To those who knew him, he was a nice guy making a name in the local music scene, with no history of violence or trouble with the law. However, his bandmates noticed his tendency towards depression and a not-so-cheerful temperament, which was starkly different from his energetic stage person. Unknown to many, Cody harbored interests far removed from the music world, and behind his friendly and sometimes melancholic exterior lurked a much darker side. In secret, Cody had developed a bizarre fascination with serial killers from around the world, and even kept a list of dangerous individuals he admired. Among his favorites were Joseph James D'Angelo, Andre Chikatilo, Yvonne Mela, Fred West, and Tommy Lynn Sells, all notorious for their heinous minds. But topping Cody's dark list was none other than Ted Bundy. This criminal had kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered about 30 women in the 1970s in the United States. After being convicted for the trail of terror he left behind, Bundy was executed in 1989. With his criminal idol in mind, Cody got into his car and, in a twist of fate that would prove deadly for Bobby Ann, spotted her at the bus stop. The exact details of how he approached her remain unclear, but it's likely she didn't see him as a threat due to his unassuming appearance. Taking advantage of the secluded spot, Cody struck her on the head with a hammer, the blow causing her to collapse. He tried to flee, but upon reaching his car, he noticed she was trying to get up. He returned to the scene, dragged her to his vehicle, and forcibly placed her inside, despite her incapacitated state. In the McLeod family, there was a rule that whoever left home should inform the family upon reaching their destination. This simple act provided peace of mind. That's why, when an hour and a half had passed since Bobby Ann left and Donna hadn't heard from her daughter, she started to worry. She texted to ask if Bobby Ann was okay and if she had reached her meeting spot with her boyfriend. With no reply from Bobby Ann and her phone going unanswered, which was out of character, the family grew anxious. By 8 p.m., her boyfriend, who was waiting for her at their planned meetup spot, was surprised by her absence, as punctuality was one of Bobby Ann's notable traits. As time slowly ticked by without her arrival, he, trying to remain patient, stayed put, but eventually gave in to his nerves and began calling her. His worry deepened with each unanswered ring. About an hour later, he called the McLeod residence to ask if Bobby Ann was there. This call escalated the family's anxiety, as no one knew her whereabouts, and all attempts to reach her on her mobile phone had failed. Donna and Adrian couldn't just sit by idly, so they started calling Bobby Ann's friends one by one, only to sadly find out that no one knew where she was. Although they hoped nothing bad had happened, deep down they feared the worst. Without further delay, they went to the police and reported her missing. It was after 9 p.m. The next day, November 21st, 2021, the police launched a search operation in the area, joined by the McLeod family, friends, and volunteer neighbors. They also distributed flyers throughout the city featuring Bobby Ann's photo and contact numbers for any sightings. Her disappearance was widely reported on social media and local news outlets. One of the most heartfelt appeals came from her brother Lee, who pleaded on social media for everyone in Plymouth to help search for his little sister. He urged anyone with any information about Bobby Ann to come forward, as he desperately wanted her back home. The police tried to trace the young girl's path from her house to the bus stop, but found nothing noteworthy. Knowing she planned to take a bus to the city center, they inquired with the bus service to see if she had boarded any of their vehicles, but this lead quickly went nowhere. However, during interviews with locals, the police received a crucial tip from a resident who had passed by the bus stop the previous afternoon and seen Bobby Ann there, around the time she took her last social media photo. This confirmed that she had reached the bus stop and stayed there for some time, giving investigators a starting point. Upon searching the nearby area, officers found a pair of AirPods behind the bus shelter, later confirmed by Donna and Adrian to belong to Bobby Ann. The area around the bus stop was cordoned off with yellow tape, and the police conducted a thorough inspection, even getting on their knees to search for any potential evidence. The search extended to all nearby streets. Since Bobby Ann never boarded the bus and her AirPods were found close to the bus stop, authorities considered the possibility that she might have been abducted or attacked during a robbery attempt. Believing public involvement was crucial in gathering information to find the missing student, the authorities turned to the media, calling on anyone with even the slightest information related to the case to come forward to the nearest police station. The detective of the case provided a detailed description of the missing teenager, 18 years old, slim build with light brown, shoulder-length straight hair and green eyes, wearing ear piercings. He mentioned that, according to her family, she was last seen wearing a gray sweater, black ripped jeans, fishnet stockings, and light-colored sneakers. He also directed a message to Bobby Ann herself, urging her to contact the police if she heard the appeal. He emphasized that she wasn't in trouble. They just needed to know she was safe. Another task for the investigators was to track her mobile phone, which led them to the city's outskirts, though they couldn't pinpoint the exact location. However, luck struck that same day. A bus driver on the route near the bus stop where Bobby Ann vanished handed over her phone to the police. He explained that on November 20th at 7:15 p.m., a local found the phone and an empty AirPods case at the same stop used by Bobby Ann. When a bus arrived at 7:23 p.m., the local spoke with the driver and handed over the items, assuming the owner would come looking for them. The next day, after seeing news of Bobby Ann's disappearance and her last sighting at his bus stop, the driver decided to give the found items to the police. On November 22nd, the family, police, and volunteers continued searching for clues in the fields, forests, and roads around Bobby Ann's area, but found nothing, growing increasingly desperate. Then, on November 23rd, 2021, at 1:17 p.m., a voluntary witness's statement at the police station significantly shifted the investigation's direction. A young, well-dressed, and polite man entered the station, offering information about the missing girl, expressing his wish to assist the police and her family. The officers summoned a detective to speak with him. Unaware of the bombshell about to drop, the detective listened as the man claimed he had abducted Bobby Ann from the bus stop 3 days prior and had since killed her, providing details of the alleged crime. The police, skeptical of whether to believe his story or dismiss him as a fame-seeking lunatic, placed a map before the self-confessed perpetrator, asking him to pinpoint where he left Bobby Ann. While some officers still hoped the interior design student might be alive, they rushed to the indicated location. Sadly, there was no chance of rescuing Bobby Ann. The dense underbrush impeded their advance, but as they moved forward, they found a woman's unclothed body lying face down. The state of the scene and the skin's discoloration left no doubt. The woman had died days earlier. Later, the police publicly announced that after receiving a confession from a suspect and verifying its authenticity, they had discovered a woman's lifeless body on a beach about 7 miles from the bus stop where Bobby Ann was last seen. The body was found in a wooded area and the victim had yet to be identified. However, due to the height and certain physical traits, investigators strongly believed it was Bobby Ann. While awaiting official identification, they informed the McLeod family of the discovery. The suspicions were confirmed when dental records of the victim matched those of the abducted student. The confirmation that the body was indeed that of the beloved missing student sent shockwaves through the local community. The people of Plymouth, who had actively participated in the search, were shattered by the tragic end of the case. To express their grief and support for the McLeod family, residents held a vigil near the bus stop from where Bobby Ann was taken. Overwhelmed by tears and trying to stay strong, Bobby Ann's mother thanked friends in the community for their support during the search and at the vigil honoring her daughter's memory. She regretted the sad circumstances that brought them together. With a quivering voice and shaking hands surrounded by loved ones, she delivered a prepared statement, highlighting the blessing it was to watch Bobby Ann grow up in their family. She mentioned that although her beloved daughter's life was taken too soon, the beautiful impact she had wherever she went would never be forgotten. Then, lifting her candle, she asked everyone to do the same in memory of her daughter, followed by a minute of silence. Lee, Bobby Ann's older brother, also shared his feelings, but he did so on social media, thanking her for the time they spent together and vowing never to forget her. He expressed how unjust it was for such a beautiful and talented girl to meet such a horrific and undeserved end. He shared a childhood photo of them, smiling and happy in their primary school uniforms. In the message accompanying the photo, Lee wrote that he hoped to reunite with his beloved little sister in heaven and that it was an honor to be her big brother. He promised to forever cherish the adventures and journeys they shared and wished her eternal peace. As the community and those close to Bobby Ann were still reeling from the shock of the events, the gruesome details of the crime began to emerge, stirring a mix of grief and anger among them. The forensic report highlighted the severe injuries she sustained from a blunt object, likely a hammer, revealing she had 14 serious wounds to her head and face. Contrasting with the attack's brutality, and despite her body being found unclothed, the forensic expert found no evidence of sexual assault before her death. Media outlets then disclosed the name of the alleged perpetrator of the brutal assault that ended Bobby Ann McLeod's life, identifying him as 24-year-old Cody Ackland, a musician from the same town. Following the revelation of the suspect's identity, Cody's lawyer issued a statement on his behalf, claiming full responsibility for the crime. His assertion in the statement that he had never seen the young woman before the night of the incident baffled the public, leaving the motive for such a cruel and unwarranted attack a mystery. For those who knew Cody, this news was a shocking blow, as he had never been in trouble before. However, as the investigation delved into Cody's computer, phone, and other belongings seized along with his car, they uncovered chilling aspects of his life that no one knew. Investigators found over 3,000 images on the supposedly quiet musician's phone, revealing a sinister side unknown to all. Many of these images resembled scenes from horror movies due to their disturbing and dark nature. His browsing history also showed that in the days and weeks leading up to the young woman's abduction, Cody had been researching the most heinous acts committed by serial criminals, as well as remote locations and potential weapons. In the hours before the young girl's abduction, Cody visited the website of an online sports store, browsing through baseball bats and waterproof clothing. For the investigators, the unfolding evidence seemed almost unbelievable, as Cody had been a complete unknown to them before he walked into the station with his horrific confession. He had appeared so normal that he had never attracted police attention or been involved in any trouble before. The investigators theorized that on the day of the crime, Cody succumbed to his secret desire to emulate the serial killers he idolized, leading him to commit a serious offense. They believed Bobby Ann was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, her life tragically ending due to a stranger's urge to act on his dark criminal instincts. They speculated that if Bobby Ann hadn't crossed his path, Cody might have targeted anyone else, regardless of age or gender, with his sole intent being to take a life, not necessarily to commit sexual assault. In the midst of the turmoil caused by the crime and its disturbing details, the band Cody was part of, which had recorded its first disc in August of the same year, announced on social media their decision to disband immediately. They stated that ending the band, for which Cody was the guitarist and songwriter, was an act of respect for the deceased teenager. They expressed shock over the tragedy and difficulty in coming to terms with what had happened, extending their thoughts and prayers to the family and friends of the university student who were devastated by her loss. Finally, on November 26, 2021, Cody appeared before the court, charged with murder. In the brief hearing, he was seen wearing a gray cotton sweater and a blue mask, adhering to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic health measures. He spoke only to confirm his name, address, and date of birth. The presiding magistrate informed him that he would be held in custody and face trial at the Crown Court in Plymouth. Cody was scheduled to appear at the court for a preliminary hearing to address all matters related to the case before proceeding to the actual trial. It was during the pre-trial hearings that the full extent of the horror unleashed on the day Bobby Ann and Cody's paths tragically crossed was revealed. Bobby Ann arrived at the bus shelter around 6:15 p.m. At that time, Cody, driving his Ford Fiesta, spotted her at the stop. He noted a slight resemblance between Bobby Ann and his ex-girlfriend, but he clarified that his actions were not triggered by emotional reasons or the resemblance. Instead, he had been seeking a victim to fulfill his long-standing plans. Bobby Ann, a design student, seemed the perfect target for him, so he parked on the road behind the bus stop. After stopping, he watched not only her, but also the surroundings to ensure no one else was around. Then he quietly approached her with a hammer he had brought along and struck her twice on the head. Believing the blows were fatal, he returned to his car to escape, but to his astonishment, he saw that Bobby Ann was not only alive, but also trying to get up from the ground. Faced with this unforeseen situation, Cody went back to the bus stop, dragged her away, and somehow managed to get her into his vehicle. He then drove her to a secluded parking area about 7 miles away. It was around 7:45 p.m. when he stopped in the midst of a wooded area, intending to dispose of the body there. What had already occurred to the innocent young woman was tragic enough, but the worst was yet to unfold. The most painful and chilling part of the story began at this point. Cody recounted that when he attempted to leave the body, he realized Bobby Ann was still alive and conscious. Despite having the opportunity to repent and seek help or take her to a hospital for medical care, Cody chose not to deviate from his original plan. He decided to remove her from the car, and at that moment, despite being attacked by him, the defenseless young woman expressed her fear to him. Cody told her he was scared too because he had never done anything like this before. Then he attacked her with the hammer, striking her 12 times in the head. He immediately set about destroying evidence, starting with burning her handbag in the woods. When he returned to where Bobby Ann lay, he was, in his words, both surprised and impressed because she was still alive, making some sounds. Admitting he admired her resilience, he said he then ended her suffering by suffocating her. Next, he placed her body in the trunk of his car and drove about 30 miles, where he hid the body after undressing her and removing her jewelry. Around 10 p.m., Cody returned home and went straight to bed. The next day, he threw the hammer into a river and disposed of a bag containing the blood-stained clothes of both him and Bobby Ann at some orchards. On November 21st, while the McLeods, police, and their community were frantically searching for the young woman, Cody was out enjoying himself. He went to a pizzeria with friends, attended a band rehearsal, and spent most of the night in a local bar. Witnesses called to testify noted that Cody seemed unusually cheerful that day, even making jokes and hugging friends. The defendant recounted that on November 22nd, he continued enjoying himself, buying sweets and going to the movies, while keeping up with the latest news and massive search efforts for Bobby Ann on his phone. However, the initial euphoria of having fulfilled his dark fantasies gradually faded. On November 23rd, Cody went to his job at a car service company where he worked as a valet. The morning was uneventful, but after his lunch break, he made an unexpected turn. Cody messaged his bandmates telling them he loved them and they might not see each other for a while. He also sent a message to his mother expressing his love. Then, he went to the police station and confessed to the crime. During the police statements at the hearings, it was made clear that in addition to Cody's confession, there were numerous pieces of physical evidence collected from various locations he visited after the crime. Investigators found the victim's DNA in Cody's Ford Fiesta and on sneakers recovered at his house. As for the motive behind the crime, the detective who led the investigation noted that the suspected perpetrator refused to elaborate on his reasons. Despite attempts to get answers, Cody consistently avoided questions about why he took Bobby Ann's life. He recalled that after surrendering, Cody told the police that the crime hadn't been on his mind, as it felt as surreal as a movie or fantasy. He later admitted he couldn't fully grasp his feelings about having taken someone's life, suggesting it felt like someone else had committed the act. Concerning Cody's mental state, a psychiatrist evaluating his fitness to stand trial uncovered a significant detail. The accused confessed to the specialist that the depressive feelings he had experienced throughout his life vanished after he killed the university student, and he no longer felt the same level of resentment as before. With all the case-related evidence presented during the pre-trial hearings, the trial proceeded in a Crown Court between April and May 2022. In the courtroom, Cody's lawyer acknowledged that while psychiatrists found his client did not have a mental illness, he had endured significant emotional difficulties throughout his life. He mentioned that Cody was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia, and anxiety from an early age, and had battled depression for at least 7 years. He also pointed out that Cody had received little consolation or emotional support at home and found none during his school years. Regarding a father figure or other male role models, he stated that Cody had never experienced anything positive, which, in his view, explained Cody's admiration for negative male figures. In contrast, the prosecution pointed out Cody's obsession with serial killers, particularly Ted Bundy, noting the deliberate choice of a hammer as a weapon, mirroring the preference of his top-ranked criminal idol. During the sentencing hearing, the judge characterized Cody as highly dangerous, emphasizing that his interest in serial killers extended beyond morbid fascination. He highlighted the loss of Bobby Ann McLeod's potential life, describing her murder as brutal and savage, and stated that the crime not only caused outrage, but also instilled fear across the region, for which Cody must also bear responsibility. The prosecutor depicted Cody as leading a double life, driven by a pathological desire to emulate serial killers. He called for a severe sentence for the prolonged and frenzied attack against a petite, defenseless young woman who expressed fear during her ordeal. The prosecution presented a victim impact statement from the McLeod family, portraying Bobby Ann as a beautiful and bright young woman full of future plans, brutally stolen from them. They expressed that life without her was unbearable, and while acknowledging no sentence could match the severity of the crime, demanded the full extent of legal retribution. The defense attorney, on the other hand, argued for mitigation, citing Cody's voluntary surrender and confession, which provided the McLeod family with some closure and knowledge of their daughter's fate. When delivering the sentence, the judge addressed Cody directly, stating he had brutally ended the life of a wonderful young woman after a prolonged torment. He sentenced Cody to life imprisonment, setting a minimum term of 31 years before eligibility for parole. 6 months after the tragic day her life was extinguished, the time came to bid farewell to Bobby Ann McLeod. The profound impact of her case on the community and the genuine affection of the locals for the friendly and beautiful young woman and her family were once again evident. On May 26, 2022, the day of the interior design student's funeral, hundreds lined the streets of Plymouth to pay tribute as the procession passed through the city center. The hearse, covered with a blanket and plush figures of her favorite childhood characters, Lilo and Stitch, was drawn by a horse-drawn carriage. At the funeral, Bobby Ann's favorite music, alternative rock, played, and many attendees wore band t-shirts and black jeans as a nod to the beloved young woman. Out of respect, they avoided wearing ripped jeans, the fashion she donned on the day she was attacked. One of the most touching moments was when people left flowers and balloons at a memorial bench near the bus stop, where the attack and abduction occurred. Cody's obsession with one of the most notorious serial killers of the 20th century led him to commit the unthinkable. His crime shattered a family and community still mourning the loss of the delightful young woman he killed.